We now come to the Opposition Day motion on jury trials. I inform the House that I have selected the amendment tabled in the name of the Prime Minister. I now call the Opposition spokesman to move the motion, Shadow Secretary of State Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government proposes to abolish the right to trial by jury for a vast range of offences. Any case where they expect a sentence of 3 years or less. This is nothing less than wielding a constitutional axe against the centuries-old cornerstone of our liberty. Juries are not some bureaucratic add-on to our justice system. Juries are the means by which the public consents to and participates in the exercise of the gravest power of the state, the power to convict and to imprison our fellow citizens. Yes, we face a serious Crown Court backlog. That is not in any dispute today. That is not even a subject of today's debate because everyone on both sides of the House know it and acknowledge it. We all accept that the roots of it did not begin under this Labour government. It goes back to the pandemic. It goes back further than that. We all accept that there has been a lack of investment in our criminal justice system under governments of all political persuasions, that the criminal bar is in a weak place, that young people don't feel that they can go into the law, or at least not into this most challenging and poorly paid part of it. We all accept that some of our courtrooms are in a terrible state today, that the IT system is failing, that the contracts for getting prisoners to court on time are poorly managed, and the private contractors underperforming. We all accept that this system is in a mess and needs to be reformed. But that is not the question at hand today. The question before us now is what is the best way to resolve this, and is the route to fix our criminal justice system and to deliver swift justice for victims to scrap something that we have known as a country since 1215, if not before. I'll happily give way.
Chair, the Minister for giving way. He's always very generous with his time. He talks about the length of time it takes for victims to get justice. I speak to police officers in my constituency of Harlow all the time. So one of the issues is with this backlog, this waiting list, is the fact that you've actually got police officers who've been police officers for 3 years who are asked to go to court, who for cases, for things that happened before they're even police officers. Does he recognise this? That's a huge challenge and one that we need to overcome.
I do. The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. Look, it is shameful to our country that there are victims of serious crime, like rape, who are waiting until 2028, 2029. In fact, I believe the longest listing hence is 2030 today. No one in this chamber could possibly defend that for one moment. But will this make a material difference to fixing that problem? No. Well, I don't believe it will. I've not heard anyone make the case that it really, in their hearts, will fix this problem. And I'll give way in one moment. And if it is going to make a difference, publish the modelling, the evidence, so we can see it. Because Lord Leveson hasn't published any modelling. Lord Leveson gave a view that it might lead to a 20% reduction in the length of a trial, heavily disputed by other practitioners, including, and I do not mean to demean Lord Leveson, but including from people who are closer to the coalface of our criminal justice system, judges and criminal barristers. The department has not published any modelling. Does it exist? If it does, publish it, and then we can have an honest and evidence-led debate. I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
As my right honourable friend squares up to lead civil society in a battle against this monstrous measure, can I ask him to have some sympathy for members opposite, who are about to be led to the top of the hill once again, as they were with the farm tax, as they were with the winter fuel allowance, on a measure that simply will not deliver the solution it's designed to, and they'll all end up having the rug ripped from under them once again after enduring all the political pain.
Well, my right honourable friend is right, and having served as a minister in the last Conservative government under multiple prime ministers, I've been led up a few hills before myself, and I know what it feels like to be a minister in this situation. This is not a hill to die upon. Let's fix this problem. Let's build a cross-party consensus on how we get the backlog down, and I'll speak about a few of the solutions as I see them, as we see them in a moment. This policy is not going to happen. I honestly believe this is not going to happen. There is opposition, not from the official opposition, but from every other party, from Reform, from Plaid, from Independents, from the Liberal Democrats. There's opposition from members of the Labour Party, good, experienced colleagues on the other side. There's opposition in the House of Lords from Labour peers of the highest repute, like Helena Kennedy, people who have spent careers in the law. This was not in a manifesto. The House of Lords does not have to support this. The last time Jack Straw and Tony Blair tried to do this, the House of Lords stepped in and it failed. This is a distraction. This is a waste of everyone's time. If the Deputy Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary and his ministers care about swift justice, scrap this pointless distraction and focus every hour of the day on the hard yards of government, of doing the difficult things, the administrative failures of the Ministry of Justice that have existed for years, so we can actually ensure that the backlog is brought down. I'll come to the Honourable Lady in one moment, but I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
My right honourable friend is being characteristically over-generous to the government when he talks about requiring their modelling. This is not a mastermind question. This is simple arithmetic. 3% of the trials. Right. Let's say we do away with half of them, which is more draconian, I think, than even they're talking about, and a 20% difference. The maximum difference that can make to the throughput of the court system is 0.3%.
Minimal.
It will make no difference whatsoever to one of our most fundamental issues here, and yet it will actually throw away our most fundamental tenet of our justice system.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. And this is why, if the government has a case, publish the evidence.
Help a little bit.
Publish the modelling.
Sorry. It's easy if you look to me because I can't pick it up all the time when you turn the other way. Thank you.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, apologies. Publish the evidence. Publish the modelling. This isn't a minor policy. This is changing something that we have enjoyed as a country for hundreds of years. To do something as significant as this should be done on the basis of evidence. So I would urge the Minister today, whether they accept our motion or not, is by the by, but accept the spirit of it and publish the evidence now so that everyone can see it. The lawyers, the judges, the practitioners who care and are worried about this can then engage in a proper debate. And above all, we in the House of Commons, who are the guardians of our Constitution and our ancient liberties, can have a debate on the basis of facts. If the Honourable Lady would give way, then I'll give way to the Honourable
I thank the right honourable member for giving way, and I think he has made some very valid points in terms of the situation we are now faced. The fact that we see over 78,000 cases and caught up in that backlog. Many of our constituents waiting for their day for justice. That justice denied, we know. Many people cannot continue to wait that way. But does he accept that all the issues that he's outlined now is something that there was not enough focus on during the last administration, and they could have done a lot more to resolve this, so we are now not in this difficult situation where we are having to find a way to address this?
I think both parties must share in the blame for the present situation. Look, the Permanent Secretary, or the former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Justice, came before the Justice Select Committee last year and was asked, broadly speaking, the question that you have just asked me. The Honourable Lady has just asked me. What is the root cause of the current backlog? And she responded that although the poor funding for the system had existed for some time and that had created a number of challenges, the primary cause was the pandemic. That COVID created immense strain on our criminal justice system. And as a result of that, a backlog that had, broadly speaking, been falling in the years prior to it. It had begun to rise slightly in the immediate period before the pandemic, but had broadly speaking been falling in the years beforehand, then shot up.
It is true.
Then, the Ministry of Justice...
I'm not having both sides cross-examining each other. I'm listening to just one person at the moment.
I'm just restating, I think fairly, what the Permanent Secretary said. Then, the Ministry of Justice did not do enough to get the backlog under control. There has been a serious failure to fix the productivity problems in our court system, as I think the IFS set out in a report last year, independently. Could the last government have done more? Well, perhaps it could have done. It did try to do things. It increased sitting days. It brought in the special courts so that there could be courts being held like Nightingale courts in parts of the country. And this began to make some difference. But the backlog kept rising nonetheless. The backlog has risen very substantially under this Labour government as well. In fact, to the extent we have accurate figures, it's rising by about 500 cases every month. So the problem has continued to get worse and worse. I don't therefore see today's debate as a partisan debate between the two parties. The key thing here is, how do we solve the problem now?
Absolutely.
How do we look to the future? Is slashing jury trials the answer? No. Are there better ways to do this? Yes. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. It pains me, I have to tell you, Mr Speaker, to say that I agree with the very vast majority of what he's saying from the dispatch box. He referred to Sir Brian Levison. None of us would suggest that Sir Brian doesn't know what he's doing, of course. He's very eminent. He is very skillful. He's taken a great deal of time to come up with his suggestions. But does the honourable gentleman know of any situation before when the Bar Council, the Criminal Bar Association, circuit leaders and every other stakeholder in the criminal justice system have been at one in opposition to what is an utterly ludicrous, unworkable policy?
Well, I rest my case, my lord. I thank the honourable gentleman sincerely for the way he has conducted himself and the campaign that he has and is fighting on this issue, because I know it's not easy to do so, having been someone who has campaigned at times against my own government, voted against the last Conservative government. I credit him for the work that he's doing. But let me answer the honourable gentleman's point, because he is making an important point here. Lawyers rarely agree. In fact, their profession is often to disagree. This has united everyone in opposition. The Law Society, the Bar Council, the Criminal Bar Association, lawyer after lawyer after lawyer have been saying that this policy is wrong, a better way is possible. And this isn't party political. It cuts across all sides. Yeah. You know, there are people who have been vehement critics of myself. You know, I woke up the other day to hear Anna Soubry on the Today programme saying that everything that I was arguing was right. This is not about party politics. This is about getting the right answer for our criminal justice system.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Would you agree that there are alternative models to get to the place that we all want to be at, that is to say, reducing this awful backlog that is denying justice to people? And will he take particular note, I'm sure he probably has already, of the model introduced by my constituent James Ward OBE in the South West, which had COVID resolution courts that were able to bring through proper case management within the CPS the backlog down from 52% to 2%, which meant saving 10 sitting years as a result of that intervention alone.
Well, Jenrick, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and let me come to some of the potential solutions. One of the points that is important to note is that the backlog varies very widely across the country. HMCTS is a poorly managed organisation with limited accountability to ministers and has not been performing its function as well as it should do. There are parts of our country where the backlog is far lower than others. If you go to Liverpool, for example, parts of Lancashire, Mr. Speaker, you will see that despite the closure of your local court, the court backlog is substantially lower. In Wales, the court backlog is substantially lower. So there are significant regional differences as better managers, active judges, good case management of the kind that my honourable friend mentioned has made a significant difference. If I can just advance my case a little bit, then I'll come to my honourable friend. The most important thing that we could do now is to get the courts sitting round the clock. Yeah. There are sitting days on the table which are not being used. The Lady Chief Justice, the most senior person in our judiciary, has said repeatedly that she is able to offer the government more sitting days. She said it in the press, she said it before the Justice Select Committee the other day, and I'm sure she said it privately to ministers as well. The government has been pushed slowly to take her up on those sitting days, and I commend them for that. But there are still, by her measure, I'll give way in a moment, there are still, by her measure, at least 2,000 extra sitting days available, which the government is not taking her up on. We need to go back to the Lady Chief Justice and welcome these sitting days with open arms and say, what would it take for you to produce more? Can we turn 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000? Get the courts actually sitting. That is not happening right now. And the principal reason for it is financial. Because the Ministry of Justice has not been able to secure from the Treasury a comparatively small sum of money. We can argue about the priorities of this government and we will differ across the House. But this is a relatively small sum of money which we need for the proper operation of our criminal justice system. And it must be better to spend this money on this cause than to scrap an ancient freedom that we have enjoyed for generation after generation. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm really grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He's making some excellent points about some of the alternative solutions to scrapping the right to a jury trial. And any MP who spent any time in their local courts will have seen that actually the issue isn't with juries, it's with the poor administration that's resulting in about a quarter of trials having to be rescheduled. So I wonder if he agrees with me that actually, rather than setting this precedent of scrapping the right to trial by jury, they should maybe start, the government should maybe start by looking at ways they could removing the pressure on an overwhelmed CPS. And does he think that maybe the possibility of giving the police greater charging powers would be a way to move forward on this?
Robert Jenrick. My honourable friend makes a number of very important points. Look, there are better ways to handle this situation. I don't pretend they're simple. They're difficult. They involve getting to the heart of bureaucratic organisations that have been poorly managed and are unaccountable. But let's look at some of those solutions. One, which Brian Levison himself mentions in his report, is incentivising early pleas to prevent cases dragging on unnecessarily. For example, by ensuring that those who are accused of offences meet their counsel earlier in the process, so they can have good advice about their likelihood of success or otherwise sooner than they do today, and changing the fee structure accordingly to achieve that. We'll keep on that point, yeah.
Jim Shannon.
I thank the right honourable member and the Shadow Minister for bringing this forward. In Northern Ireland, just to give an example of perhaps maybe when the Shadow Minister is looking at some of the options, we have had cause to use the duplicate courts on many occasions, and in 2023 it was only used in 0.8% of occasions because terrorist trials and serious criminal trials are not given the opportunity and because of intimidation. But our natural sense of justice demands a jury of our peers, and does the right honourable member agree with that? And does he also agree that jury trials must remain exceptional and justice can be served more efficiently by juries by increasing court dates and cutting down the number of ineffective trials that waste time, the very thing that the right honourable member has referred to?
Robert Jenrick.
Well, my honourable friend is making a series of very important points. There's something very special about being judged by a group of your own peers, the wisdom of ordinary members of the public coming together. It is basically the only opportunity for members of the public to participate in our criminal justice system. And that's something that's very important and which should be preserved. He's right to say we need to get the court sitting round the clock. Just this week alone, because of closed courtrooms, 241 sitting days have been missed. 241 in 3 days. Imagine what that is over the course of a year. We need to ensure that prisoners are arriving at court on time. The present contract is not working properly. That leads to too many trials to collapse or to suffer unacceptable levels of delay. We need to drastically improve court IT, ending the technical failures that waste hours of court time every week. As I said earlier, we need to provide proper support for the criminal bar, and I welcome the modest intervention that was made by the Justice Secretary in that respect the other day, ensuring there are enough advocates to prosecute and defend cases. These are the bottlenecks that actually drive delays. The bottleneck is a problem of resources and management, not an inevitable side effect of having citizens weigh evidence. Jury trials are not the problem. We've got to ensure that we actually get to the root of the challenge, not get rid of something that we've enjoyed for such a long period of time. Let me just mention the degree of opposition that there is right now, as my honourable friend rightly mentioned, because it is important to note how broad the opposition is within the legal world, for whom alarm bells are ringing over this proposal. The Law Society, representing thousands of solicitors, calls it an extreme measure that goes too far and fundamentally changes how our criminal justice system operates. Its president, Mark Evans, warned that the plan actually goes further than the recommendations of Sir Brian Levison's review of efficiency and isn't backed by evidence that it will solve the backlog. The Bar Council, representing barristers, have been equally clear. They see no basis for altering the structure of the court system in this way, warning that limiting the right to jury trial strikes at a core citizen's right. I will give way, and then I must conclude my remarks, because there's clearly a lot of colleagues who'd like to speak.
Ready?
I'm obliged. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I just wonder if the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Shadow Secretary of State, could clarify just one point on the opposition's position. In Scotland, you've never had a right to elect for a jury trial as an accused. The position is the prosecution decides whether a case is to go for jury trial, and the accused has no right to require a jury trial. Is the opposition's position that such a reform in Britain, in England, should be opposed? That specific point about the election. Nothing.
Well, Jenrick, that is the subject of this debate, isn't it? England and Wales have their own legal tradition. Scotland has its. Those of us who represent constituencies in England and Wales are here to defend our constitutional rights and settlement, and we will do so. It's up to those in Scotland to choose their path forwards. But the Honourable Gentleman's question also begs another one. It begs an important question in this. Is this debate about a technical, bureaucratic one? How do we get the backlog down in the most expeditious way? Or does the Honourable Gentleman speak to an ideological view that jury trials are wrong or superfluous, that ordinary people don't know what they're talking about, their views should be casually set aside? I don't know the answer to that question with respect to the Honourable Gentleman, but there are some in our politics who do take that view. There are some who think that ordinary citizens cannot be trusted. As Baroness Helena Kennedy said, there had been a trope amongst some within the Labour tradition that had she assigned some of the view that had led to Tony Blair and Jack Straw taking the original decision. Now, that is clearly not all within the Labour tradition as we see today. It may be a very small minority. It's not one that we on this side support. We want to see ordinary people continue to be at the heart of our criminal justice system. And it's for that reason that we brought this motion today. So let me conclude by saying this. This is an Opposition Day debate. But the opposition to this proposal is not these green benches behind me. It's not the green benches to my left. It is all sides of the House and the other place. It's the solicitors, the barristers, the judges that can speak out, and those privately around their kitchen tables who can't. It is the ordinary citizens of our country who want to see this preserved. Poll after poll shows it clearly. This is 800 years of legal tradition. let's not toss it aside. Let's defend it, because it matters. And then let's unite and find a way to fix the bureaucratic failures of the Ministry of Justice, to ensure, I can't give way at this moment, ensure that we have swift justice. Justice delayed is justice denied. We all agree on that. We can do this without ruining a gift that this country has given to the Western world. A gift to the world, a fundamental part of our Constitution and our democracy. Vote for our motion today. Defend jury trials. And then tomorrow, let's work together to fix the court backlog.
The question is, as on the order paper, I now call the Minister to move the amendment. Sarah Sackman.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the amendment standing in the name of the Prime Minister. Let's fix it tomorrow, the right honourable gentleman says. Tomorrow, tomorrow and tomorrow. What a luxury. Our justice system is in a state of crisis, as the honourable gentleman has said. But in every crisis, whilst there's risk, there's also an opportunity. And the opportunity here is one that we, in government, grasp to modernise our justice system and bring it into the 21st century. Let's start with the crisis. I didn't hear an apology in the right honourable gentleman's speech, but what it did do is lay bare the facts of what the previous government did to our justice system. Being in government is about choices. And we know what choices His Majesty's opposition would make about the justice system because they had 14 years to show the world. Now he says, let's come together. Let's talk about investment in our system. Let's come up with solutions. But what did they do for 14 years? The previous government closed half of all the courts in England and Wales. Who did they entrust to be guardians of our justice system? Liz Truss, Dominic Raab, Chris Grayling. They decimated our legal aid system. They all but broke our prison system. And the result? Well, he's right. There is consensus that we're in crisis and that the status quo cannot be tolerated. With nearly 80,000 criminal cases currently waiting to be heard in the Crown Court, that's more than double the waiting list pre-COVID. Victims of justice waiting for years. Currently in the Crown Court waiting list, over 20,000 open cases waiting for a year or more. Justice delayed is justice denied, and the party opposite must bear much of the blame, but you'll never hear that word. Sorry, I'm prepared to give way.
I'm not really interested in a party political rant, but plainly she is. What I am interested is expediting justice for my constituents. And she will have heard in my intervention on my right honourable friend that there is a model to solve this. Will she, please, look closely at the model that my constituent James Ward brought forward that had spectacular results in terms of reducing the delays in our criminal justice system, and say why that model isn't being applied, but abolition of trial by jury is.
Minister.
14 years they had to implement the solutions that they now say are blindingly obvious. The fact is that swift courts, flow courts, blitz courts, whatever you want to call them, are being operated, but they cannot keep up with the demand. Our justice system has simply not kept pace with the times and demands of modern society. There is now record demand of criminal cases, more police officers, arrests up by 10%, and cases arriving at the Crown Court up 20%. Trials are more complex, cases taking on average 71% longer. Technology like smartphones, the smartphones we carry in our pockets, creating more digital evidence than ever before. Jury trials are taking twice as long as they did in 2000. And what these delays mean is that in many cases, justice is simply not being served. Because with the delays, witnesses pull out, memories fade, as others have pointed out, more trials crack, and as a result, justice is not being served. We have a system where, as we know, there are criminals who are planning next Christmas and the Christmas after that suspended at home with their families, gaming the system, whilst victims wait longer and longer for justice, dealing with the isolation, with the mental torment, unable to heal, unable to move on. And yet no one is defending the status quo, and yet no government to date has been bold enough to take the necessary action towards finding a solution. I am a firm believer that politics is an agent of change. It's why I left my own career in the law to enter politics. And when you're presented with a crisis, you see the opportunity, you find the plan, and you fix it. You make it better. I'm prepared to give way.
Of giving way. In the motion which she has signed, it refers to the government's impact assessment. Has the government actually done an impact assessment and is refusing to publish it? Or did they announce plans to end jury trials for certain cases without that evidence?
My answer to him is simple. There will be an impact assessment. This House will have the opportunity to scrutinise it, but it's important that the impact assessment assesses the bill that's brought forward, which has to interact, of course, with the concordat process and the agreed number of sitting days with the judiciary. But what I would say to him is this. We as a government don't practice the learned helplessness that His Majesty's opposition did in the last 14 years. We look for solutions, and it's why we commissioned the independent review of criminal courts to conduct and carry out a careful piece of work to provide the blueprint for the change that we know is so desperately needed. All I hear from the opposition is the government should simply ignore that work. Well, that's the evidence base, and that's the blueprint that we're going to follow. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And on this point about delay and the solutions that we must bring forward, just yesterday I was with communities near here in Victoria who are facing the scourge of street drug dealing and aggressive harassment by drug dealers on my residents, and they prey on very vulnerable people who find themselves rough sleeping as well. And speaking to the police and people in the sector and people who are working on the very front line, they tell me that they are really struggling with the state of our court system. They're really struggling with the state of our justice system. So does the Minister agree with me that it is victims of crime who are affected by this, and also communities who are facing the scourge of crime and antisocial behaviour on our streets who are struggling with this? And also, I know that she will have been listening to the Shadow Secretary of State in terms of in his remarks, and was she as profoundly disappointed in me at both his attempt at building a consensus on this topic and also the complete paucity of suggestions that he has brought forward, when many of them I know are already being considered?
Well, she is right that at the heart of the considerations that we need to make as we bring our justice system reformed and rebuilt into the 21st century are victims. This is all about delivering swift justice for victims, because actually what our Constitution guarantees is not in fact a constitutional right to a jury trial. It's a constitutional right to a fair trial. And the essential ingredient of fairness is timeliness, not waiting years whilst evidence deteriorates, whilst memories fade, whilst victims and witnesses alike pull out, but actually getting swift justice. And when I talk about reform of the system, yes, of course, I listen to important stakeholders who lead our professions. Of course, their opinion counts. But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that my interest is in having a criminal justice system that serves the public, not that serves lawyers.
Thank you.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. The opposition is very keen to rely on the Magna Carta to defend jury trials, but the Magna Carta also says that justice should not be delayed. Sir Brian Leveson has reported that jury trials are taking twice as long as they did in 2000 because criminal cases are much more complex now. They can involve thousands of pages of electronic evidence. We are putting more pressure on jurors, financial and other pressures, and it's much more difficult now to support and guide jurors. So there is clearly a case for reform. Will my right honourable friend please also consider, because I understand one of the recommendations made by Sir Brian Leveson was to have jury trials replaced by a judge and 2 magistrates. So could that be a possible compromise to reduce the delays?
Well, he's right that the nature of crime, the nature of the evidence presented is altering the way in which our criminal justice system works. But what I would say this, and I want to provide this reassurance to those in the House, these measures, as well as modernising and rebuilding our justice system, are designed to protect jury trials for the most serious cases. Many of those trials, as I've said, are becoming compromised, with many victims of the most serious crimes waiting years for justice. It is right that when we ask jurors to do the most important civic duty, that we use their time wisely. Does it make sense? Does it make sense that the queue of the victim of rape or the victim of a homicide is shared with someone who's stolen a bottle of whiskey, who could be dealt by a lay magistrate, who, by the way, introduces the lay and democratic element into our court? Yes, I am prepared to give way.
Because in the letter written to the Criminal Court Reform by the Justice Secretary to the Justice Committee, it says specifically, when it comes to rape and prioritisation, we are not introducing specific targets for rape cases, but our overall objective is to drive down these waiting times as quickly as possible. Listing is a judicial function, and the judiciary itself already prioritised cases involving vulnerable victims and witnesses, which include victims of sexual offences, including rape. Therefore, when she uses her example of whiskey, it is not appropriate because it is fundamentally wrong by the letter written by David Lammy himself.
Well, he is right that listing, of course, is a judicial function, but the fact remains, and this is CPS data, there were some 4,000 cases last year which could have been heard 4 times faster, because we know that in the magistrates' court cases are heard 4 times faster than the Crown, where the magistrates had the sentencing powers to deal with that matter, where a defendant, because they have a right to elect under the current system, elected for a jury trial. Now, why did they elect for a jury trial? Why did they elect for a jury trial? They'd elected because they could do, because it would drag the process out longer. But if that can be dealt with 4 times faster in the magistrates' court, then by removing the right to elect, which is what we propose to do, that is a far more efficient way, freeing up Crown Court capacity in order that those very serious cases, not just rape, robbery, homicide, serious drug offences, can be dealt with more swiftly. Now, I'm prepared to give way.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you to the Minister for giving way. Because what has been missing from this debate is the word victims, mention of victims. We inherited a system where there are criminals that will have chosen to spend Christmas at home with their children. They will still be at home with their children next year and the year after, because we have a system where they can kick justice down the road. Meanwhile, women will have been raped this Christmas and they will have to wait half a decade for justice. How can you defend the system?
Before the minister responds, interventions should be short, and colleagues should be here at the beginning if they wish to make interventions. I wasn't here at the beginning. I don't need any help, but if you're making interventions on a particular person that's speaking, you need to be here at the beginning of that speech. Please keep interventions short. Minister.
As so often, my honourable friend is a powerful advocate for women and for victims, and as I've said, the reforms that the government are bringing forward have laser-focused, swift justice for victims. I do want to address the point that's made about investment, that if we invest... I'm going to complete this point and then I'll take an intervention. That investment is what is needed, and investment can get us out of the crisis that we're in. Well, let me be absolutely clear. This government is making investment, turning round an oil tanker which has been run into the ground for years when we inherited it. This year alone, we allocated over 11,000 sitting days to the Crown Court. That's the highest ever number of sitting days, and 5,000 more than His Majesty's opposition allocated when they were in government. The Concordat is taking its course, and there will be more to come. We've invested too in the professions, an uplift for criminal legal aid solicitors of £92 million. As part of this package, £34 million for criminal defence barristers, and crucially, match funding for pupillages to increase the talent pipeline so we can have the sustainability of legal practitioners to both prosecute and defend cases in the system. So we are making that investment, and we will ensure that that record-breaking investment continues so that people are not waiting longer and longer. But let me be absolutely clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. Funding alone will not solve the problem. The government cannot simply sit its way out and write a blank cheque. Don't take my word for it. That is the central conclusion of the independent review of criminal courts. Yes, we need more investment, but investment alone will not resolve the crisis and decline in our criminal justice system. We need three things. Investment, yes, and that is starting to be made and percolating into the system. Reform, which is what the independent review of criminal courts tells us which we need. The opposition says ignore it. I am not prepared to. And thirdly, modernisation. How can we harness the technology now at our disposal, whether it's in terms of AI transcription, case summarisation, to ensure that we are getting swift justice? It's those three pillars that are going to transform and bring our criminal justice system into the 21st century. But those who tell you that simply spending our way out of the problem or tweaking a lever here and there is going to solve it, it won't. I agree. Those who say that we should bring prisoners to court more efficiently to avoid delays, do we need to do that? Yes, we do. And I eagerly await part 2 of Sir Brian's report, but those are things that we are working on straight away. Do we need more efficient listing? I agree. Yes, we do. Let's get those efficiencies. In that, there is consensus. But do I think, and does the government think, that that alone will salvage the system where there is such an acute degree of crisis? No. We need the reform, we need the modernisation, together with the investment. Yes, I'm prepared to give way.
She describes the problem.
Who are you giving way to?
Sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've already recognised that there is a regional aspect to this, and Wales's Crown Courts generally outperform those in England. They're not perfect. We have a backlog of maintenance issues and other problems, but I can only reiterate the opposition of past and present Labour Welsh Government Councils General. So they're saying that scrapping jury trials are both extreme and unnecessary. So why not take this as an opportunity to keep jury trials in Wales, so we can get a real-time impact assessment which we could compare with what is happening in England if we have to have changes?
Minister.
Well, she is right that, of course, that there are regional differences. The situation for those in the South East, in London, and indeed parts of the North East and North West is utterly dire. But let me be absolutely clear and clarify something she said. She says that we're scrapping jury trials. We're not scrapping jury trials. Let's get the facts straight. Let's get the facts straight about the way the system works now and the way things will work once these proposals are implemented. People talk about a right to a jury trial, and the public could be forgiven that everybody who graces a criminal court gets a jury trial. Well, of course, that's not how things work. 90% of cases in this country are heard without a jury trial. They're heard robustly and rigorously in our magistrates' court, which of course retain that lay element. And I pay tribute to the work of our magistrates who are drawn from our communities, providing local justice, representing the communities that they serve. The remainder are currently heard by jury trial, and the most serious crimes, homicide, kidnapping, robbery, serious drug offences, possession of a weapon, all of those will continue to be heard by juries under our proposals. What we are making is in line with expert recommendations, as occurs in other jurisdictions like Canada, like New South Wales, comparable to ours, is actually a fairly modest reform, removing the right to elect so that those cases that can be heard by the Magistrates' Court are retained in the Magistrates' Court, and a modest number of cases are heard through a swifter court, the Crown Court Bench Division, and in addition, by the way, that complex fraud currently heard and economic crime currently heard with a jury is appropriately heard by an expert judge. That is a sensible, pragmatic package of reforms informed by an independent review. And asking us to simply ignore the work of the review, I'm afraid, is just simply not sensible. If we were to leave that review on the shelf, gathering dust, you would say the government is failing to pull every lever. I'm not prepared to do that. We've asked people to have a long, hard look at it, not just Sir Brian Levison, David Ormerod, a distinguished criminal academic, and the other members of the panel. We are going to take that and implement that as our blueprint. I'll give way.
Thank the Minister for giving way. On that point about magistrates, in 2012 I took part in a 6-month in-depth application process to become a magistrate and was accepted. I was then told, because of a pause by the previous government, that there would be no recruitment, and in the following 8 years after that, we lost 10,000 magistrates, to the point that in 2019 the then Justice Committee wrote, and I'll quote, that the crisis was as frustrating as it was foreseeable, and it has taken a near crisis to prompt the then government into belated action. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the opposition can't have the cake and eat it? They've got to understand that the system is a crisis of their making.
Well, I couldn't agree with him more, and as someone with responsibility for our magistrates' recruitment, it's something that you will have seen in the early headlines this year. We're looking for more magistrates. We want them to be more diverse, younger, from different parts of the country, from different backgrounds. And actually, as I said, our magistracy at the moment has halved in the last 10 years. I want to see us turn that around as we place our confidence in our magistrates to continue handling the vast majority of criminal cases which they do at the moment. Yes, I'm prepared to give way.
Thank the Minister for giving way. My first job after graduating was in a magistrates' court, where they were just making the transition from writing court records in this huge ledger by hand to computerisation, and I appreciate it's modernised an awful lot since then. But I wanted to pick up on the point that my honourable friend from Cities of London and Westminster made about the impact of persistent drug dealing on local communities. One of the things that's being piloted in Bristol is an intensive supervision court, because obviously we know that a huge number of crimes are committed by people with persistent drug addictions. If we can divert them from the criminal justice system, it will help free up our courts. Could you potentially say a little bit about what we're doing to roll out that programme?
Minister.
She asks a really important question, and we will be laying out our plans on just that. How do we prevent that revolving door of reoffending? It's there in the work that we're doing on sentencing and also early intervention, because prevention is so much better than cure. And you can see one of the most depressing features that has arisen as a result of the rising waiting lists in our Crown Court is that the number of early guilty pleas, those pleading guilty at the earliest possible opportunity, has gone down precipitously. And what that means is that very often offenders are pleading guilty at the door of the court. That wastes huge amounts of resource. And I want to make sure that jury trials are there for the most serious cases, that we're using jurors' time effectively and efficiently, because we owe it to them, just as we owe it to victims, to deliver swifter justice. Now, as I've said, I've heard the concerns of the opposition. I've heard the concerns of those who head up the professions. There are those in the profession who support what they're doing. We have our detractors. I'm not putting my fingers in my ears. I've engaged with them throughout this process, just as the IRCC, the Independent Review of Criminal Courts, has done. People have questioned whether swift courts will work. The Independent Review of Criminal Courts has recommended this swift court model. It was a model championed by Lord Justice Auld, by the Times Justice Commission. It's one that exists, as I said, in other countries like Canada, and it works there. Sir Brian estimates that trials without a jury could reduce hearing time by at least 20%, and he says that estimate is a conservative one, and it stands to reason. Jury trials are important, but hearing cases with a jury, without a jury, negates the need for jury selection. It negates the need for judges to explain legal concepts to jurors. It negates the need for jury deliberation. These all add to the time it takes to hear a case in the Crown Court. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the Minister, for giving way. She talks about the presumption, which is what it is, that Sir Brian makes, that there'll be a 20% reduction in time if it's a single judge as opposed to a jury. I think that's probably right, actually, and I think he's probably right to say that's conservative. But what about the writing up? When does the judge write the judgment, give the reasons? Are they doing that while they're putting the kids to bed in the evening, or are they doing that the following day, and the day after, and the day after that? Because reasons will be necessary when a single judge is deciding the innocence of guilt of a defendant. What's the answer?
Minister.
Well, he's right that, of course, if you have a case determined by a judge, that reasons will need to be given, and indeed reasons are a good thing. The transparency that those convicted of a crime will have to know why the result has been reached. And of course, I'm sure that Sir Brian Leveson himself would have been well aware of the need for the judge to give reasons, and will have factored that in to his conclusion. In the same way that we've got the data from Canada, from New South Wales. I met with judges in the Supreme Court in Toronto. There they have equivalent cases tried judge alone and tried with a jury. Now, it's not about the relative merits of those two things, but simply as a practical matter, on timing alone, they told me that it takes about half the time. So it is undeniable, given the evidence that we have, that this is going to take less time. And when I have to focus on an efficient system that deploys resources in a proportionate way and delivers swifter justice for victims, it would be madness to ignore the conclusions of the independent review. Yes, I'm happy to give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just on the point of saving time in relation to fewer jury trials, does my right honourable friend agree with me that this isn't just about the amount of time a jury is in the courtroom itself, but all of the other factors within the criminal justice system that contributes to that? So the time it takes for the back office staff to organise jury selection and summonsing, the time it takes for the Crown Prosecution Service to prepare reams and reams of paper for jury bundles, the time it takes to deal with the expenses, etc., etc. It's about the criminal justice system, in my view, as a whole, not just the time in that courtroom.
Before the Minister responds, and to save another member from any embarrassment, coming halfway through a statement and trying to intervene is not acceptable. Minister.
Well, I know that she speaks with ample experience of 2 decades working for the Crown Prosecution Service, and so she knows exactly how the system works, warts and all, and that realism, that pragmatism that she brings, I think speaks to this really important point that operating a jury system is expensive, it takes a lot of time, and it's why we've got to deploy it in a timely way, in a proportionate way for the most important cases. At the moment, it's available for 3% of cases, but so many of those cases are running in such a delayed fashion that they're collapsing at the 11th hour, that justice isn't being served, and so actually we're undermining the jury system by allowing the system to run out of control. And it's because we want to preserve, this feature of our legal system, that it's so important that we take heed of the recommendations of the independent review, that we make the necessary investment and we modernise. I'll take way for the final time and then I'll wrap up.
The Right Honourable Lady is being very generous. The nub of her argument is that there will be a material difference to cutting the backlog through reducing the number of jury trials. She's quoted some conversations that she's had with Canada and so on, and I don't doubt her sincerity and the work that she's done. Why wouldn't she commit today to publish, not in months to come, but this week or next week, as soon as practicable, the modelling and evidence basis for the assertions that she's making today? I will happily return to this dispatch box if she proves me wrong on the basis of the evidence that she brings. Will she make that commitment to all of us today?
Minister.
Well, I will make a commitment to publish an impact assessment, an equalities impact assessment, and the evidence of the independent review in the usual way when we bring forward our formal government response and the legislation that will be necessary to take forward. Parliament will have a chance to scrutinise that, to interrogate that, and indeed to express its opposition if that is the conclusion that is reached. But let me be absolutely clear. When I was in practice, when I used to appear in court, and I made a proposition, the judge would say, where's the evidence for your proposition, as I'm being asked to do now? And there is authority for the proposition that I'm making, for the proposition that we believe that if institutions aren't working, vital institutions aren't working for the British public, we should be open to changing them. And we should be open to changing them in 3 ways: by making investment, which we're beginning to do, through structural reform, which is what is on the table, and through modernisation. And the evidence base for that structural reform is as follows. The international comparisons, Sir Brian Levison's independent expert review. The fact that we know, and this is critical, and this is MOJ data, triable either way cases, so a case that could be heard in the magistrates or could be heard in the Crown, can be heard 4 times faster and are heard 4 times faster in the magistrates' court. So if you take cases that are not suitable for the Crown Court, free up capacity for our Crown Court to hear those most serious cases and hear them in the magistrates' court, it stands to reason that it will go faster. But of course, we will publish the detail at the appropriate time for all to scrutinise. Let me conclude by saying this. Everyone today here has agreed we're in a state of crisis. The difference between His Majesty's opposition and with the government is that I reject the learned helplessness that festered under the previous government. This government has a choice to make, and we are making it. We are making the decision to use a crisis and to turn it into an opportunity, to bring down the waiting list and to modernise the system in the process. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, people ask me, Sarah, would you be doing this if there wasn't a crisis in our courts? And I say yes, because we need a better system. We need a better system, one where courts, not criminals, triage cases, one that makes better use of jurors' time, and so that someone accused of shoplifting is not in the same queue as another victim. No one has had the guts to take on a programme of reform of this scale, but this government does have the guts. 14 years they had to solve the system, they ran it into the ground. We make a different choice. We are bringing forward change.
The original question was, as on the order paper, since when an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. And I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm glad that the Minister has heard the opposition from across the House, from honourable and right honourable members, and I've got great news for her. She's going to hear it again. An opinion that many of us share across the House and the political divide is our criminal justice system is in complete disarray, with nothing epitomising this more than the backlog in our criminal courts. In our Crown Courts, this stands at almost 80,000 cases, with trial dates now stretching late into this decade. The delayed justice, harm to victims and impacts on rehabilitation are a shameful legacy of over a decade of complacent Conservative governments. Their inability to recognise the crisis and steer a new course to fix the system is completely unforgivable. Instead, the Prime Minister ran away from full prisons and a court system in disarray and called a general election in 2024. So although we will be supporting the Conservative motion today, I look forward to hearing many contributions from their backbenchers apologising for not only causing this crisis, but also their abject failure to fix it when they actually had the power to do so. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Thanks to my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a very powerful case. Does she agree that it's not the responsibility of jury trials for the court cases piling up to nearly 80,000? And then the real causes are staff shortages, broken estates, and 10 years of Conservative complacency that hollowed out the justice system and left victims waiting years for their day in court.
I thank my honourable friend for her contribution, and she's absolutely right. And we in the Liberal Democrats on these benches have sympathy for the scale of the task that this Labour government has inherited. And we're glad that they do recognise the real losers here, the victims. It is an utter failure of the justice system that victims and defendants are being given court dates for the end of the decade. Years of delay, re-traumatisation, when so many just want justice and then to move on with their lives. But here's the rub. We fundamentally disagree with the government's approach to tackling it. They're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, ignoring the actual issues and targeting a key and celebrated success. trial by jury is deeply enshrined in our conscience and constitution, respected all over the world. The possibility of being tried by one's peers, not an elite, unrepresentative group of individuals, is fundamental to a fair trial in this country, a point recognised by the Deputy Prime Minister himself in the Lammy Review. The Lammy Review concluded that, unlike other stages of the criminal justice system, jury trials do not show statistical bias against ethnic minorities. The Deputy Prime Minister set out in extreme detail that, compared with magistrates' courts, Crown courts provide an effective check on prejudice and avoid discriminatory verdicts. 12 heads are better than 1, a point proven by the increased public trust in jury trials. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'd just like to suggest, in support of what she's been saying, that surely a distinction of which we need to be aware is that whereas the judge is a specialist in deciding what the law says and how it should be applied, he is not a specialist, he or she is not a specialist in deciding whether someone's telling the truth or not. And in that sense, you are far more likely to get the right answer from a group of people considering it together as a collectivity than an individual, no matter how eminent in the intricacies of the law.
Hear, hear. The honourable gentleman makes a very valid and worthwhile point, and I thank him for raising it. It is therefore highly irresponsible and dangerous for this government to pursue efforts to remove the right to trial by jury in most Crown Court cases as a means of fixing the backlog, although we have just heard from the Minister that actually that's not the intention at all. The intention is that she would do it anyway, especially given that the evidence behind those provisions' effectiveness is flimsy. The government claims that this decision... I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I've been contacted by so many KCs and criminal barristers in Winchester, one of them Rosemary Burns, and I think what the collective confusion is why are we removing such a sort of fundamental constitutional entrenched principle rather than focusing on crumbling courtrooms, courtrooms sitting empty due to the cap in the number of days the court can sit, and the failure of prisoner transport to bring defendants to court in time. Why are these logistical and infrastructure issues not being focused on and laser focused on before this is even considered?
Something that I will come on to later in my contribution about the inefficiencies within the system. I will make some progress if he doesn't mind. The government claims that this decision has stemmed from the review undertaken by Sir Brian Levison, the first part of which was published last year. The objective behind the review, commissioned by this government, was rightly to find solutions to the overwhelming backlog, and Levison's original suggestion, the creation of a Crown Court bench division, including a judge and 2 magistrates, was modelled to reduce trial length by 20%. I will just finish my point, if she doesn't mind. The government, however, has gone further than Levison recommended, meaning that those accused of crimes with likely sentences of less than 3 years will, for the most part, not be heard by a jury. New so-called swift courts will be created when just one judge hears cases. The efficiency savings quoted by the government are the same figures suggested by Levison under his Crown Court bench division model, but the modelling has, like this entire proposal, been widely criticised for lacking transparent data behind the calculations. I will give way on that point.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree with me, a slight confusion, that the Minister consistently referenced the importance of this review and how independent it was and how important it was, and then has actually thrown out the central tenet of it, which was to introduce a court which has a judge and 2 magistrates, which would provide 3 heads rather than 1, some local influence and some lay people. And I wonder if she has any views as to why it is that the Minister is so insistent on this central tenet, given how important this review is.
I thank my honourable friend, who is also a member of the Justice Select Committee, for her very important point about raising that Levison did not suggest this proposal at all. What he was talking about was a separate division, which the Deputy Prime Minister has announced as a swift court. He has ignored the impact of having 2 lay people as magistrates as part of that. It doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't make sense to any people in this room either. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Lady for giving way. Does she share my dismay that not only did the Minister admit in her closing remarks that her plans are ideological, not practical, expedient, but also that she spent 30 minutes without talking about the central issue, which is that the majority of cases that are listed in our court crack on day one, meaning that the courts are there, but nobody is actually working within them. And it's that needs to be sorted out, rather than this maladroit plan to reduce liberties that we've enjoyed for 800 years.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point, and he preempts what I will be going on to say in my speech. We have yet to see an impact assessment. This has been spoken about by the right honourable gentleman, the Shadow Justice Secretary. It was also mentioned in the amendment that was tabled by the government. If we can see the modelling, the actual impact assessment, and understand where these savings are coming from, and even if the figures are accurate, they avoid the glaringly obvious fact that they're measured currently against a completely inefficient system. A system which is fundamentally not undermined by jury trials, but instead plagued by years of underinvestment, creating an ever-growing list of unaddressed issues across the system. This is a fact that this government currently seems willing to ignore, despite it being present in every piece of discourse surrounding their proposals. They have bought a car that will not run, and they've decided to spend all their time and money on a new paint job before actually opening the bonnet. It is utterly shameful, fundamentally because, despite the narrative that they are advancing, there are alternatives. They do not have to attack jury trials, especially when their own ministers and their own Prime Minister have been fierce advocates of jury trials in the past. Instead, they should be looking at the real issues within the system that have led us to this point. Chief among them is the productivity decline our criminal courts have experienced since 2016, wasted time in and around courts, caused by a wide range of issues, all of which are being ignored by the Ministry of Justice. This means that the increased investment the government has undertaken is being used inefficiently. It also means that many of these issues would persist even if their attack on jury trials does lead to reductions in trial length. The solutions are out there. The majority of legal professionals opposing the government's reforms are overflowing with practical suggestions, but the government is not listening. So today I will lay out some of them here. First, there must be investment in the courts estate, not only to reopen the hundreds of courts closed under the Conservatives, including my court in Chichester, but also to properly maintain those that remain open. The evidence of leaking roofs, foul smells, flooded rooms across the estate is hardly indicative of a properly functioning justice system. This must be addressed. Trials abandoned because the heating isn't working or there is no running water is unacceptable for those victims. Even at a roughest of estimates, the restriction of jury trials will at best save 9,000 sitting days in court a year. This is based on not being able to see an impact assessment. The government could increase the number of sitting days up to the possible 130,000, which would far exceed the apparent savings that they would gain from the removal of trials. The concept of a restriction of sitting days is artificial. If you have a case and a courtroom and a defendant on remand and court staff ready to go, then the case should be heard. Happily give way.
Thank you. I'd just gently point out to the Honourable Lady that this isn't just about a courtroom being available. This is about the resources that have to go into that. So this isn't just do we have the space. This is about do we have the barristers, do we have the solicitors, do we have enough CPS lawyers, do we have enough court clerks, do we have enough ushers. This is a bigger picture, and this is why the whole package that the government is putting forward is incredibly important, because just tinkering around the edges has been done for years, and we are in this crisis now.
I don't disagree with the Honourable Lady when she points out that it does have to be a full package of support, but that's actually not what we're debating today. I am laying out all of those things that she rightly points out, that there are total inefficiencies within our court system, but until we see those situations addressed and those things fixed, then how do we know that we're not going to save the court sitting days that apparently eroding the right to jury trial will do? I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Isleworth Crown Court, which is one of the closest courts to my constituency, last year closed down 5 out of 14 of its courts because of maintenance issues, but also because of the cap on sitting days put in place by the previous Conservative government and only partially lifted by this government. So does she agree with me that as well as addressing all the maintenance issues and the system inefficiency, if we increase the number of court sitting days and address the workforce issues, we could preserve this fundamental right to a jury trial for all?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and this government have rightly increased days back to their 2016 levels, but with a rising backlog, they need to go further and increase capacity. As pointed out by the secret barrister in his blog, we also have huge delays in the NHS, but you don't see the government proposing a cap on A&E sitting days to save on having the lights on in A&E. Adding to this are the hours lost to unenforceable contracts that have left many trials without a defendant, while everyone waits for them to be delivered from prison. Given that a key argument advanced by the government for reducing jury trials is the increasing length of trials, explicitly linked to complexity, I would urge them to address the impact of these failing contracts. And there are also key efficiencies to be gained in investment in the IT systems, with widespread complaints about functional Wi-Fi and disrupted systems. The common platform system advertised to solve these issues is over budget and still delayed. Serious solutions to address issues like this, instead they are seemingly ignored. And yes, there are costs associated, of course there are, but there are clearly major costs not addressing the issues in the system. For example, it costs £55,000 a year to keep someone in prison, and the number of people in prison on remand has doubled in the last 7 years. So the savings are there as well, they just need to be realised. It is also clear from courts such as Liverpool Crown Court, which I think was mentioned earlier, that efficiencies can be achieved without spending through a proactive and realistic approach. Jamie Hamilton KC has set out steps such as prioritising cases where late guilty pleas are likely, leading to improved outcomes in case clearance. It is unfathomable to me that the government has tasked Brian Leveson with 2 reports, the second of which is to focus on efficiency improvements and the better use of technology in the court system. Surely that is the logical report to have first, to introduce those efficiencies and bring the backlog down. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government has identified the problem they inherited, but they have arrived at entirely the wrong solutions. They are searching for an easy way out, a quick fix, but reducing access to jury trials is not that fix. It is unscrutinised, unfair, and continues the trend of declining public trust in our justice system. The government is right that victims are among those being let down, waiting years for justice and unable to move on with their lives. But we need solutions that work, solutions that address the causes of the crisis, reverse the systematic underfunding that has plagued the system, and genuinely improve efficiency. Thank you.
To ensure that everybody is able to contribute, there will be a speaking limit to begin with at 8 minutes, but it will come down further. Andy Slaughter.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The background to this debate is well known. Against a historically high and growing backlog of cases in the Crown Court provoked by the previous government, the former Lord Chancellor commissioned Sir Brian Leveson to undertake an independent review of the criminal courts with the aim of bringing the backlog down. Part 1 of that review was published in July 2025. It suggests structural and policy changes. Sir Brian made 45 recommendations, a few of which concern changes to mode of trial. These have become the main issue of contention because they restrict the right to jury trial. The policy changes proposed came first because some require primary legislation, but in a matter of weeks we will also have part 2 of Sir Brian's report, which will look at greater efficiency in the Crown Court and may be less contentious. Yes. Sir Brian is clear that all the recommendations and both parts of his report are a package, not a pick-and-mix selection. That is because he believes the crisis in the Crown Court, with trials for serious offences waiting 3 or 4 years to be heard, is so severe that every lever must be pulled to control and then reduce it. In this he is surely right. Moreover, this is not a short-term problem. Changes to the complexity and detail of criminal cases mean longer and more legally and factually difficult trials are here to stay. For this reason, he does not recommend changes are temporary or to be curtailed, for example, by a sunset clause in any legislation. So what happens now? First, we must have Sir Brian's full report to consider. As I say, part 2 is due imminently. Secondly, we have the government's response to the report, saying which recommendations it accepts entirely or in part and which it rejects. Then comes the bill putting necessary recommendations in law and accompanied, we are told, by an impact assessment giving greater statistical colour to the effect of the proposals on the backlog. The likely date... I'll give way once, but I'm aware of time.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and he's an expert in this area. But if every lever needs to be pulled, shouldn't there be a removal of the cap on sitting days, which would make a far bigger difference to clearing the backlog than removing jury trials?
I'm coming on to that, and sitting days have already been increased substantially over what the previous government did, and I think they should go further. But I do, when Sir Brian says every lever, I think that's exactly what he means. The likely date for all the documents I've just mentioned to surface is sometime in spring, ahead of the end of this session, with the bill carried over into the next and becoming law later this year. On the 14th of October 2025, the Right Honourable and Learning Member for Kenilworth and Southern led a debate in Westminster Hall on the independent review of the Criminal Courts Part 1. I recommend that debate to members present. It's well informed and measured on all sides. I do not think today's debate will take the matter further in the absence of the documents I have just described. But here we are. In the meantime, there have been some loud protests about certain proposals of Sir Brian's from parts of the legal profession and from some members of this House. These include replacing the right to a rehearing of a case decided in the Magistrates' Court with a limited right of appeal, and extending the trial by judge and magistrates to more serious offences than is currently the practice with district judges in the magistrates and youth courts, and this by creating a Crown Court bench division. The Government has stated it wishes to go beyond Sir Brian's proposal for a judge to sit with two magistrates, in some cases, currently tried by judge and jury, and allow a single judge to decide guilt or innocence in cases likely to attract a sentence of up to 3 years' custody. They also go further than Sir Brian in proposing to extend magistrates' sentencing powers to 18 or possibly 24 months and removing entirely the defendant's right to elect. Where the Government seeks to go further than the independent review, it should set out clearly its reasons for doing so. The most controversial proposal is to curtail the right to trial by jury in between a quarter and a half of cases where it is currently available, while retaining it for more serious offences. My own view is that trial by jury is not an absolute or immutable right. The availability of jury trial has varied and generally become more constricted over the ages, in criminal and civil cases, for defamation and inquests, by reclassifying offences from either way to summary only. But I am pro-jury. I think a lay element in the criminal justice process is reassuring, intruding a more democratic element into a profession regarded by some as elitist and homogenous. I think the involvement of citizens in the criminal justice system, whether jurors or magistrates, is good not only for the individuals and the legal system, but for society generally. But where do we draw the line between jury trial and other modes of trial? It's a matter of degree and judgment, not, I think, of legal or moral principle. I think there is nothing wrong with reviewing the appropriate forum for trial, as has been done many times, whether in its own right or because it is a piece of the jigsaw which will create a better system overall. I would like to see more evidence to support the contention in Sir Brian's review that significant time will be saved and a significant increase in cases heard will result. I would like to hear that there is more money for sitting days, for trial counsel, for functioning courts, that courts are run more efficiently, that listing is as good at every Crown Court as it is at the best, that Serco and Amy deliver prisoners to court in good time to start the day's proceedings, not halfway through the afternoon. We are not going to get the answers to all these questions today, though I hope we will before long. I prefer the Government amendment that anticipates this information being provided to the opposition motion that prejudges what it will say. And I do acknowledge that the Government has already increased budget and already provided greater efficiency measures. The Justice Committee is seized of this issue. We heard evidence from Sir Brian Leveson in November, interrogated the Lord Chancellor in December, and next week we will hear from opponents and supporters of the proposed reforms and from the Minister of State who opened this debate. We may have some criticism of the bill or the government response to the review and seek to amend. But like the government, and I think MPs on all sides, we hear every week of fresh indignities heaped upon victims of crime and on defendants too, made to wait years beyond what is humane, often in a physical or mental prison for a resolution of their case. Not to consider them is not to be serious either about the damage delay is doing to individuals or to confidence in our courts. This is not a one-way valve. There are gains and losses, whatever course we take. For the present, I am prepared to give the government the benefit of the doubt that they are looking for every possible measure to repair our battered justice system, and certainly I prefer their honest endeavour to the gamesmanship of the party opposite, who broke the system and now seek to use its dilapidated condition as a political tool.
David Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by commending my own front bench? I don't always agree with him. I'm not quite Anna Soubry, but I don't always agree with him. But on this, I think he struck exactly the right tone. Yeah. Speaker, somebody who's criticised the Department of Justice under all parties rather vigorously for 30 years. And I think he struck exactly the right tone, that this is a system that has to be put right from failures over 30 years and more, and we have to address it by not taking the fundamentals out of it in the process of doing so. Can I also do something unusual and commend the Liberal spokesman, which I don't often do, because I thought it was a very well thought through speech.
I was going to say, New Year, New David.
I'm losing the whole house piece by piece. That's okay, you know, because I say to the Minister, I would pay some attention to the detail of that speech, because it was some extremely important points made. As for the chairman of the Justice Committee, he and I have fought together on some spectacular miscarriage cases, successfully, I think, in the biggest one. But I didn't agree with him when he said that this didn't address matters which were fundamental to the justice system, morally fundamental, if you like, because the jury system absolutely is fundamental for a few reasons I'm going to touch on in a minute. The Minister, who's got a difficult job, her department, bluntly, has not done very well, not the ministers just themselves, but the actual department itself, has not done a very good job of managing the system over decades. The system failures have been serially spectacular. I recommend she looks back at some of the National Audit Office reports on it. I commissioned one as Public Accounts Committee Chairman. It's the longest NAO report I think I ever remember, and the most complex, because the matters are systemically complex and they don't lend themselves to just off-the-cuff answers. And she talks about modernisation, and modernisation is often important, but modernisation shouldn't be at the price of taking out the most important building block in our justice system, one which the rest of the world, as my right honourable colleague said, has been copying for centuries. And that's why, of course, the majority of the judiciary themselves don't agree with this. And when I raised this matter with the Justice Secretary, I think at questions on one occasion, I asked him whether he'd read the report by Mr. Rivlin KC, which actually does a formidable job of forensically taking apart the Leveson recommendations. And one of the points he makes is that Leveson is making judgments quite properly as a judge, a very distinguished judge of very long standing, but he's not making them on the basis of empirical data. There was very little empirical data behind what Justice Leveson argued. So I think it's really important that we that we look at that. And I would recommend to the Minister, if she hasn't read it, she reads Mr. Rivlin's note. And in part of it, he was the head of the Southwark Crown Court, which is one of the highest throughput courts in the country. And he put this point to all of his judges. Not one agreed with Leveson, working active judges today. Now, implicit in Leveson's comments, and certainly implicit in what the Minister said, is an underlying idea that juries are not quite up to it in certain cases. They can't quite cope, particularly in technical and financial cases. Well, frankly, I've handled about a dozen miscarriage of justice cases over the course of the last decade or two. And in not one of them was the jury the source of the error. More often than not, it was a misdirection by a judge or an error of the system, or the court case was allowed to get out of control in some way or another. I'll come back to an example or two in a minute. And it was pretty much always the judge, sometimes the other lawyers in court, but pretty much always the judge, not the jury. And so the risks in this are quite significant. And by the way, when she is modelling the numbers, and she talks about speed of the magistrates system, please do look at the appeal rates for magistrates' decisions and the number of appeals in which the magistrates' decisions are overturned. I will give way. Yeah.
I'd just like to gently say to the Right Honourable Member that the current system for appeals from the Magistrates' Court requires a full retrial. Now, when somebody comes to give evidence, we're asking a lot of them there, particularly victims. So to do that all over again after a wait of considerable months or even years is very onerous, and a lot of them are the simple fact that the witness or the victim doesn't want to go through that all over again. That's the problem there, which this fixes.
She highlights yet another problem in the Magistrates' Court. I mean, that's the problem. Yeah. So I rest the point. The point here is that trying to do a big systemic change, if you're going to do that, you don't change the fundamentals. You do that as a separate, testable exercise later on after you've tried everything else. But let me come back to this issue of the expertise of juries. It's illegal in Britain to talk to jurors about what happened in the jury room. It's not allowed. But there's one spectacular lacuna in that. And that was in one of the most complicated financial cases, the Jubilee Line fraud trial, which collapsed. And as a result, it was possible to interview the jurors. Now, this was particularly in the area where it said that jurors can't cope, complex financial law. And they were asked, couldn't they cope? Was there a problem? When they were asked, they answered quite unequivocally when they were asked if they could not understand the case. They said, oh yeah, we could understand the case. It was the lawyers that couldn't understand the case. And that's precisely what the outcome of that analysis was. Now, secondly, I say to the Minister, she resisted publishing the model. That's understandable. I can see why she's doing that, and she wants it to be presented properly and transparently, I hope, and so on. But she's made the decision. Yeah, exactly. She's made the decision already. So at very least, she should be telling us what the size of saving is, what the size of change is. Now, my judgment is it's less than 0.5%, the point I made in the intervention earlier. She may disagree. Well, let's see what she thinks it really is. Because we are expected to take this on trust, and we should never change something as fundamental to our constitution and our justice system on trust. Never. I don't think this will move the dial at all. Now, there's one other systemic issue here I want to raise. And again, my own side might not like it, because the primary case undermined, not unusual, I know, the primary case undermined a part of the Thatcher government's activities. And it was a case of Clive Ponting. He was the man, the civil servant, who gave out the information that the Belgrano was sunk whilst it was leaving the Falklands, not arriving. The judge, in that case, instructed the jury to find guilty. And they found him not guilty. Why? Because they made a moral judgment about the powers and rights of the state over the citizen. And you cannot replace that. You cannot replace that by any judicial mechanism other than that. So my comment to the Minister is, I sympathise
with the size of the problem. She's right to try and take it on, full on. You know, I'm glad she does, and I'll support her what she does. But she should not do it by wrecking the system. Justice delayed is justice denied, but summary justice is not justice at all.
Turner. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate, and I congratulate the opposition on using one of their opposition day debates to debate this very important subject. There's no doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this government inherited a terrible crisis in the criminal justice system, with the backlog of criminal cases, both in the Crown Court and in the magistrates, growing every single day. But I can tell members that I've been in this place for 16 years. I was elected, I think, in May 2010. And in those 16 years, not once have I been tempted to vote against the whip. Not once have I voted against the Labour Party, whether in opposition or in government. But I'll tell the Minister, the Chief Whip, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister now, I will vote against this ludicrous proposal every step of the way, including voting with the opposition today. This proposal goes well and truly beyond what Brian Leveson recommended. I've got the privilege of knowing Brian Leveson a little bit. He helped me on occasion put a private member's bill together on the issue of causing serious injury by dangerous driving. That was adopted by Ken Clarke as Justice Secretary, and it was put into the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act. Ken Clarke always has the joke that he accepted my private member's bill as an amendment to the bill, but then I voted against the bill. It's the type of thing I would do, of course. But these proposals will not reduce the backlog one iota. Sir Brian speaks of 20% savings, efficiency. I don't dispute the fact that it's quicker for a single judge here in a trial to deal with the trial. But what happens to the writing up? What happens to the judgment, giving reasons for why the judge has come to the view that the judge has come to in the particular case? That won't take minutes. As I said in my intervention to the Minister, the judge is not going to put that to bed whilst he's putting kids to bed in the evening. It's going to take days, potentially. So any saving is lost by having to write up the reasons. There are a multitude of reasons for the backlog in the criminal courts, and it's right. I have to be honest here. It's parties of all political persuasions for decades failing to invest in the criminal justice system. That's the reality of where we are. The government, the previous government rather, played their part as well. But since we've been in government, we've not addressed the issues as we should, in my view. Because the backlog can be addressed. If we look at Liverpool Crown Court as an example, proper case management of cases, what's the backlog in Liverpool Crown Court? We should go there, perhaps, and have a look at what the judge is doing there. I'm concerned as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the magistrates' extra powers, up to 24-month sentencing. That concerns me. The reality is this: 41% of appeals from the magistrates to the Crown Court are successful. That's a concern. And in any event, if there's going to be more cases in the magistrates because they've got more powers to sentence, where are all these guilty people going to be put? All these guilty criminals who are apparently going to be convicted in swifter forms of justice, where are they going to be imprisoned? I say this is a ludicrous proposal, and it really is, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it won't work. It's not in the Labour Party manifesto. There was no mention of doing away with some jury trials. I suspect the opposition was as shocked as anybody when they had to give up one of their opposition debates on this subject, because the Secretary of State for Justice, in opposition, would have gone off his head about the prospects of this being proposed by the previous Conservative government. But look, this raises more questions than it actually answers. So I have some questions for my honourable friend the Minister. One, did the Ministry of Justice do any modelling before the announcement? And if not, why not? If they did modelling, can we see it now? Please, can we see it? Did the Secretary of State consider piloting single-judge-only trials? Why are ministers determined to pretend that trials for shop theft as an example are holding up cases of serious sexual assaults? There are listing priorities in those cases. If a listings officer in a Crown Court is prioritising a shop theft over a rape or serious sexual assault, there's a major problem. I accept that. But if the Minister can point to an example of that happening, fine. Give us the example and let's go off and investigate that. Because frankly, I don't think that is happening. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, 75 Crown Court courtrooms are sat idle, not sitting. 75 out of 516. Why? Why don't we address the issue of courts not sitting? If we don't have enough judges and barristers to conduct some trials, where does the Justice Secretary think the judges and the barristers are going to come from to do these judge-only trials? How long does the Minister think it's going to take for the prosecution, the defence and the judge to determine whether or not the particular case is worth less than 3 years on conviction and thus viable for a bench trial? When will circuit judges find the time to draft the reasons? A point I've already made. What counts as successful delivery of a prisoner to court? Mid-afternoon? Ready for court at 9 o'clock so the barrister and the solicitor can have a conference before they're called into court at 10? What's the delivery that these private companies are expected to meet? Because I know of an example recently where a Crown Court judge, and I won't identify the court, or indeed the judge, was asking an officer to come up to court to explain why they'd arrived at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the answer that was given was that they had to stop for a cheese sandwich. That's what's happening in the real world, and that's the issues that the Minister needs to address. And what happens if a case is determined suitable for a bench trial, less than 3 years, but then the judge, after conviction, gives more than 3 years? This is a terrible error. My final question is this. If the Minister was charged with, say, a fraud or false accounting case, would she want to be tried by a judge of 12, or would she want a single judge sitting alone?
Order. Time limit has now dropped to 4 minutes. Dr. Luke Evans.
Deputy Speaker, and prepping for this, it's trying to work out whether this is solving an administrative problem by simply changing a principle. So the three areas I'm going to try and cover, we'll see how we get on, are the principle, the policy process and the practical side. If we deal with the principle first, we've heard a number of times justice delayed is justice denied. It does harm trust and it can prolong suffering. But of course, justice done wrongly corrupts the system itself. And the Justice Secretary knows this in his own Lammy report when he said juries act as a filter for prejudice when it comes to trials. So moving on to the policy process part of it, on the one hand, the government is saying this is much needed to help with the admin side. On the other hand, it's saying these are very small changes only. And you only have to look at the letter written by the Secretary of State to the Justice Secretary to try and pull some of this apart, because it states of the circa 3% of criminal trials that proceed to a jury trial in the Crown Court, over half would still proceed to the Crown Court and get a jury trial post-reform. However, later on, it says, an alternative way of expressing the impact is to account for cases that will be retained in the magistrate courts after the reforms, based on projected case volumes and case mix of those cases that will still proceed to Crown Court post-reforms. Around 3/4 of them are still expected to be allocated to jury trial. So already we've got a discrepancy in the same paragraph in the same letter to set out what the numbers are. So therefore the question has been asked multiple times, has there been modelling done? Well, we know from the letter, again, addressed to the committee, that modelling has been done, because it says, the assumptions underpinning the modelling of the reforms I announced last week are that subject to the concordat process, the agreed sitting days in the judiciary, and it will be improper to preempt the conclusions of this process. In short, modelling has been done. So if you want to strengthen your argument, why would you not produce that modelling? Now, when we've asked the Minister, who's at the dispatch box today, and she was asked again by my friend from Norfolk for the 7th time, has an impact assessment been done and not released, or being done and being brought forward? We still didn't have an answer. You would have thought, if you've done the work, I will give way.
I am grateful, and I'm also grateful for the motion, the opportunity to object cross-party to restrictions on our important rights to a trial by jury. But I was hoping the Conservatives in this debate today would be admitting some real responsibility for the awful state of our criminal justice system. I wondered if the honourable member was going to correct that gap in any further way in his contributions.
Sorry, I refer directly to the opening of the speech. If she sits and reads Hansard, it was very much different. But if you, regarding that point, I will move on to the other practical points that we need to be talking about, which is some of the issues even in this letter that are pointed out when it comes to process. For example, judges will assess the likely sentence in accordance with the sentencing guidance. This will consider the facts of the case to make a determination of likely culpability, harm, etc., etc. It then goes on to say, and eligibility is based on the likely sentence length, and any trial either way offences could be scoped for the CCBD, if they're likely to receive a sentence of 3 years or less. So what happens if the judge decides that they wouldn't go to a jury trial, when later on it says in the same letter, we expect the judges will retain the full sentencing powers available to the Crown Court, meaning there is no restriction on the sentence that can be handed down to the case. This points out the fact that actually a judge could be making a decision saying at pre-hearing it's not going to be needing to trial because it will be less than 3 years, and then after that finding out that no, we're actually going to be sentenced for 5, 6, 7 years. There's a real discrepancy. And even in the letter itself, it also turns around and says, as you know, we do not have minimum sentences in law. Well, that's demonstrably not true. Think about drug trafficking, firearms, or repeat knife offences. You only have to look at the Criminal Justice Act Court Act 2015, Section 28, which talks about if you're using a knife for a second time, you have a minimum of 6 months. And this was codified and re-updated in Section 315 of the Sentencing Act in 2020. So this letter is filled with holes. And I'd like to point my thanks to Joanna Hardy-Susskind, who's pointed out a lot of these issues, because she's done a lot of work of explaining that the Justice Department doesn't even understand the letters it's putting out. In defence of this, if it was to release the modelling and the impact assessment, it could demonstrate to us all why we should make the change. Now, I'm running short on time to talk about the practicality, so I will close by where I started.
I'm not just standing to give him a minute. Will you agree with me that even given the time limits, even if you accept what it says in that case, being sent down for a couple of years can destroy a life?
Absolutely, and this is fundamental, and you have to have trust in the system and the decision that's being taken in front of you, and I worry that this is being eroded by what's being proposed here today. But I'm going to change my speech, because actually I started on the presumption, as I stated, that this government is trying to solve an admin problem with a principal change. But I think after listening to the front bench, I'm wrong. Because actually what she said was, Sarah, would you still go with this regardless of the backlog? And the answer was
yes.
Yes.
Terrible.
There you have it. It's clearer than never before. Efficiency is the excuse. Ideology is the aim, and regardless of the vote today, we've had the answer here for all to see that this government doesn't believe in maintaining jury trials. So for that reason, you have to stay and vote with this side of the House.
We're facing a real and serious crisis in our criminal courts, and this is not something that has happened overnight, and it certainly didn't happen by accident. It's the result of 14 years of neglect, and it's now denying justice to people up and down the country, because right now 80,000 cases are waiting to be heard in the Crown Court, and if we do nothing, the number will only grow. As we've heard today, in some areas, cases are listed until 2030. Yes, I'll give way.
And agree with me that it's really frustrating to hear people say that it's a result of COVID, when it's clear that backlogs were increasing before COVID as a result of underlying factors, including substantial returns cuts to the justice system, court closures, reductions in judges and court staff, and they began rising in 2019, the same year that they cut sitting days.
Yeah, absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I'm immensely frustrated at the rhetoric on that point. I'll give way.
Tell the House, were backlogs higher or lower in 2010 than they were in 2019 before the pandemic?
To take the question, but unfortunately I didn't hear the apology that should have preluded it for the absolute carnage that they left in our courts on their watch, and have shown no recognition or contrition for what they have left behind, because in every single one of those cases there is at least one victim who is unable to access the justice. So I'm glad that they all find it so amusing, but they find it much less amusing when they're on the other end of it within the justice system, because every victim is waiting to move on, every witness is stuck in limbo, and every defendant entitled to have their case heard within a reasonable time, to repay their debt, or even to begin to be rehabilitated is waiting. And I speak about this not just as a Member of Parliament, but as a former member of the judiciary myself. Having sat as a magistrate, I've made the decisions in courtrooms that I knew would have lasting impacts on people's lives. I've seen firsthand, I'll give way.
Member for giving way. A very valid point was raised earlier on that before a matter is decided upon in terms of triaging whether a case should have a jury trial or not, if a judge decides that that sentence would be less than 3 years, but in fact after a trial in absence of a jury, the judge decides he or she must get 5 or 6 years, does that individual have a right to appeal that decision and have a jury trial?
Good question. I'm sure that my honourable friend will be able to go into the details of the substantive point that the honourable gentleman has made, but if I may make some progress at this point. Because as I said, I've made decisions that will impact on people's lives. I've seen firsthand how long the delays damage victims' well-being, undermine their confidence and cause too many to withdraw from the process altogether. Because this is not a failure of victims, but a failure of the system. And let's be clear, because the backlog isn't just frustrating, but it is frustrated. Some defendants gaming the system to delay their trial, to avoid accountability for as long as possible, in the hope that by the time their case is heard, either it will fall over entirely, or that witnesses and victims will be unable to give evidence, which is not as fresh as it was before. It is simply indefensible, and it's exactly the type of behaviour that reforms are designed to stop. We are already investing heavily with more Crown Court sitting days this year than ever before. We are putting money into repairing and modernising court buildings, into legal aid and into victim support services with long-term funding so that these services can actually plan ahead. But anyone who has worked in the courts knows this. We simply cannot spend our way out of this problem alone, because there simply aren't the judges, the criminal barristers, the court staff to keep up with demand, and even the courts running flat out are struggling. Without any reform, the backlog will continue to grow. Now, as we've heard today, everyone will have the right to a fair trial. That is fundamental. But the truth is that most criminal cases have never involved juries. Over 90% are already dealt with by magistrates, and they are dealt with fairly. And let's also be honest about the history, because it was a Conservative government through the Criminal Justice Act in 1988 that restricted eligibility for jury trials by reclassifying a range of offences to be summary only. Selective amnesia that we see all too often in this place. Now, as I've mentioned, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a former magistrate, I am proud of the work that magistrates do, and I'm pleased to see the recruitment campaign launched recently to recruit more of them to the bench, because they're volunteers, drawn from their communities, giving up their time to serve the public. They are more representative of the society they serve than the judiciary is as a whole, and they take their responsibilities extremely seriously. And I thoroughly enjoyed my role and would truly encourage anyone from my communities and communities across the country to put themselves forward for this important role. Sir Brian Levison has been clear. Jury trials now take far longer than they used to. largely because cases are more complex and involve vast amounts of digital evidence, and that isn't anyone's fault, but it does mean that the system needs to adapt. We must restore confidence by keeping communities safe, making sure victims are supported and not forgotten by the system that is meant to protect them. The Conservatives left us justice system behind in serious trouble, and Labour is the one who's choosing to fix it.
Dr Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the right to trial by jury is not some procedural convenience capable of being abridged when the administrative weather turns foul. It is one of the great constitutional expressions of liberty under the law. It is overwhelmingly legitimate because it places the citizen and not the state at the heart of criminal judgment. When the state proposes to narrow the circumstances in which it must persuade 12 of a defendant's peers, it is not merely managing a backlog, it is fundamentally recalibrating the balance between the individual and the Crown. Now, there is no doubt that the criminal justice system is under acute strain. Victims wait too long, defendants wait too long. Justice itself is stretched thin. But the issue before us is not whether reform is necessary, it's whether this reform is justified, proportionate and supported by evidence. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I hear everything that he says, and I just reflect on the opening speech from the Shadow Secretary of State, where he laid out a number of areas that could be immediately acted upon to improve the efficiency and to ensure that we maintain the pillar of society in terms of our jury trials. Would you agree that we should be focusing immediately on that rather than demolishing?
No use. It's not me responding. Dr Neil Shastri-Hurst.
My honourable friend is entirely right, and I will touch upon some of those points in a moment. Now, quite rightly, much reliance has been placed upon the report of Sir Brian Leveson. He's a jurist of great distinction, and his work deserves careful reading rather than convenient citation. But notwithstanding his analysis, this is a fundamental change to our legal system. And what is conspicuously absent from the government's argument is compelling evidence that jury trials themselves are the principal driver for delay. If we are serious about confronting the backlog, we must look unflinchingly at the real causes, those prosaic but decisive failures of capacity for which the jury trial is merely the most visible casualty. Firstly, judicial sitting days. Courts cannot hear cases without judges. For too long, we've rationed judicial time as though it were a luxury rather than the lifeblood of the system. Courtrooms stand idle not because juries can't be summoned, but because there are no judges available to sit. Secondly, the court estate itself. In too many parts of the country, criminal courts are dilapidated, they're unreliable, and they are frankly unfit for purpose. Trials are delayed because of leaking roofs, broken technology, and inadequate facilities. The third point, I will give way.
That is likely to say that the reasons that our courts are falling down, the reasons that so many are so dilapidated, is because we didn't see investment by 14 years of Conservative government.
I thank the honourable lady for her intervention. She is right to a degree. There has been failures by successive governments to invest in the criminal justice system. If we were serious about this in this place, we would look at cutting welfare, for example, which spends the entirety of the Ministry of Justice budget in just 2 weeks. We need to prioritise where we spend money, and the criminal justice system has been left high and dry for far too long by governments of all colours. It is now routine for trials to be adjourned because defendants either arrive late or they do not arrive at all. Juries are discharged, witnesses are turned away, and days of court time are lost as a consequence. These delays have nothing whatsoever, Madam Deputy Speaker, to do with the presence of a jury and everything to do with operational failure within the system. The fourth point I wish to make, and possibly the most grave, is the erosion of the criminal bar itself. We face a serious shortage of suitably qualified advocates, both to prosecute and to defend. Cases are delayed because no one of appropriate experience is available or willing to take them on. Now, that isn't inefficiency, it is attrition. Against that backdrop, to curtail jury trials risks mistaking the symptom for the disease. Worse, it risks creating a system that is perhaps faster but thinner, ostensibly more efficient, but unquestionably less legitimate. And I think of the words of Lord Hailsham, a former Lord Chancellor and one of the greatest legal minds of the last century, who warned this very House of the dangers of an elective dictatorship, of the slow accretion of power to the state at the expense of the citizen. Jury trial is one of the great counterweights to that tendency. It ensures the coercive power of the criminal law is exercised only with the consent of the community. And juries, of course, do much more than merely find facts. They embody public confidence, they guard against institutional complacency, and they remind us that justice is not merely something administered to the people, but something done with them. If the government believes this is right, to curtail this right, it must show clear evidence that jury trials themselves cause the delay, that alternative modes of trial would be demonstrably faster, that fairness, legitimacy and public confidence would not be diminished. Justice delayed is, of course, justice denied. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. Given that there was no mention of reforming the jury trial system in the Labour manifesto, given the fact that this is a fundamental and very serious change to the way in which our legal system operates, and that legal system has served us well for centuries, does the Honourable Member agree with me that without any form of electoral mandate, this should never be allowed to go ahead?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for his intervention, and he's entirely right. There is no mandate for this decision, such as significant constitutional change to our legal system, and it is being done without the will of the people. Justice delayed is, as I say, indeed justice denied. But justice expedited at the cost of constitutional principle may prove, Madam Deputy Speaker, a far greater denial still.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trial by jury is a cornerstone of our justice system. Being held to account in court by our fellow citizens is one of the embodiments of the principle of justice by the people, for the people. But like all aspects of our justice system, the jury trial has a history. It has changed over time in response to changing social needs. So I think a better understanding of how and why it has changed in the past help us to understand, if not agree, with present-day proposals to amend it for our times. And I'll focus my remarks on that history, if I may, in support of Amendment A. When juries were first introduced, one of their first roles was to determine the facts of the case before them. In other words, they had an investigative function, a function that was later removed from them and given to other bodies. Juries then went on to be used in both civil and criminal cases for centuries, until they weren't. A major reform of the 19th century removed juries from the adjudication of civil cases. A key driver of that reform was the pressing need to process a vastly increased flow of civil disputes created by a more complex commercial economy. Today, our civil justice system is renowned around the world for its robustness and fairness. The composition and role of the jury in criminal cases has also undergone major changes over time. In the mid-19th century, who was it that was called to serve on juries? Men of property. Though they gave verdicts in trials on a wide range of alleged offences. But if we jump forward to the early 20th century, we see some major changes to that arrangement. By then, the range of people who could be called for jury service had now widened. Women and working people could now be called for jury service, but the range of offences deemed to require a jury trial had greatly narrowed. Now, why was that? This was because the Summary Jurisdiction Act of 1879, which was passed in this place, and it was passed in this place because of the need to respond to the need for enhanced public access to justice, and what it did was greatly expand the remit of summary courts and magistrates. And it's very key, of course, that the magistracy is another embodiment of justice by the people, for the people. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I could say more. This very potted history shows that juries have played a vital but shifting part in our justice system. They have never operated in isolation from the other moving parts of that justice ecosystem. Their remit has narrowed at different points over time as the remits of other judicial bodies have expanded and flexed. So for me, the government's proposals for court reform are rooted in an undisputed drive to modernise our justice system. Those proposals retain jury trials. the right to jury trial is not being removed. They also, however, encompass a much wider range of suggested and very necessary changes to our justice system in order to uphold public access to justice.
Kearns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Jury trials were introduced to bring order and justice to a legal system beset by opportunism, superstition, bias and archaic practices. For 8 centuries, they have been the bedrock of English and British liberty, recognised globally as a bulwark against tyranny and oppression. And yet without any modelling, no impact assessment, no equalities assessment, and not in line with the review done by Sir Levinson, the government plans to scrap this ancient protection. I have yet to make an argument, but I will shortly. Who in this place can honestly say that the seeking, when facing incarceration, they would be happy with just one judge making that decision with no jury? Think of victims who face unconscious bias on a daily basis and do not get justice with just one person deciding that. But most sinister of all is the debate this afternoon in this chamber, where Labour MPs have argued that juries, ordinary people, can't be trusted. They're not up to the job. It's too complex, it's too detailed. What next? Are you going to strip their right to vote as well? It is deeply concerning. The Minister has also said today that this isn't as the result of some crisis that the Labour MPs want to blame on Conservatives, that they would be doing this anyway, because it is ideological. Every time the Labour government comes in, they have tried to strip jury trials. Under Blair when I was a child, and now yet again. Both the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary previously recognised the importance of jury trials. In fact, they opposed the abolition publicly. How are they going to justify their change of mind? Perhaps when the Justice Secretary returns to the benches, as he certainly will after the next election, he'll bring in trial by combat next. Almost 40 of the government's own MPs have opposed this, and they are absolutely right to do so because there are other options, whether it be the unused sitting days or whether it be Sir Levinson's proposal of having one judge and 2 magistrates. There is some aspect of a layperson having a say. Now, clearly, the Prime Minister can admit when he gets something wrong and change course, as we saw, albeit far too late, on the family farm tax, on welfare and on grooming gangs. Don't leave it too late this time. The Labour manifesto made no mention of curtailing our right to jury trials, but this is not a minor shift in policy. It is a worrying trend fundamental to the relationship between the individual and the state. We are seeing it with digital ID. We are seeing it with the stripping of these fundamental freedoms. And jury trials recognise the gravity of removing someone's right to liberty. Ultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm just wrapping up, but go on if the Honourable Lady would like to.
I wonder what she thinks about this, or what she thinks about the history of jury trials, which has shown that they've flexed over time. They've not been an inalienable ancient right.
The Honourable Lady had listened carefully. I did not say they were an inalienable right. In fact, the law says you have a right to a fair trial. However, we have established historically that jury trials mean the unconscious bias and the archaic and appalling way in which history has shown that one individual making a decision over others is often not fair, transparent or right. As we heard from Sir David Davis, the amount of trials that have to go to retrial are higher when there is one individual making a decision rather than a jury.
Just to make sure the member doesn't make a further mistake, do not mention colleagues by their first names.
Serious apologies, Madam Speaker. A year of maternity leave does leave one a little bit with cobwebs, so I apologise. Ultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, the British people are very clear they do not want to see this. They do not want to see a fundamental change of their relation. I will happily give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way and making very persuasive points around modelling and impact assessments. As someone who practices in the criminal bar for the last 2 decades, I can tell you, tell the chair, if I may, that you're still going to have opening speeches by defence counsel and prosecution counsel. You're still going to have cross-examination of witnesses. And most importantly, what you will get is questioning of the defendants and judges understanding the procedure, but also defendants must understand the procedure and closing speeches. So I can't see where there'd be savings. So that's why the modelling is so important. Does the Honourable Member agree?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we see the continual argument that the average layperson cannot understand justice. If a defence lawyer, if a prosecution lawyer cannot make the argument make sense to the average person, they have no job representing an individual within the court. It is their duty to make law transparent and make it understandable to every individual. These arguments that court cases become more detailed, we should be pleased that there are more detailed and more complex arguments being made in our courts. This is a sign of a court system that is working, not relying on basics or tropes to get justice. And yet the Labour Party sees it the opposite. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I see this unfortunately as yet another disappointing and deeply sinister step towards the government changing our fundamental relationship with the Crown and the State. So I urge the government, listen to the legal industry, trust the British people and listen to them.
Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wanted to be a barrister from when I was a child. I didn't know any lawyers. I think I got most of my ideas about what lawyers did from TV shows. But jury trials is what I wanted to do. And some of my most memorable moments as a barrister was prosecuting and defending in front of juries. So I do get the importance of jury trials. But I also saw courts falling down, I saw delays getting longer and longer, and I've spent recent years hearing from former colleagues talk about cases that are to be listed in 3, 4, 5 years into the future. And we've heard the Crown Court backlog is sitting at 78,000 cases, and behind every single one of those cases is justice put on hold. A family left reeling from a burglary, a teenager recovering from assault, a survivor of sexual assault who has been waiting for years for her day in court, and it is not acceptable. And of course I want to see increased funding, and with this Labour government we're already beginning to see that, with an additional £450 million per year earmarked for the court system over the spending review period to fund the increased number of court sitting days. But Sir Brian Leveson made it abundantly clear that the system in its current form cannot stop the backlog from growing. And with more digital evidence being presented in court, DNA, cell site, electronic, social media evidence, the massive disclosure exercises, trials are more complex. And Sir Brian Leveson found that jury trials are taking twice as long as they did in the year 2000. And having spent over a year of my time as a barrister walking on a complicated insider trading fraud, we spent huge amounts of time and resources working about how we present that prosecution to a jury. And it's not saying that they're not capable. It is saying that when it comes to the suitability and proportionality, I need no persuasion that when it comes to some fraud trials and similarly technical trials, it is often not appropriate for those to be jury trials. Can we also be absolutely clear that the proposal is not scrapping jury trials? It is to amend which cases are to be heard by juries, and types of cases being heard by jury has changed and evolved over time. And through the Criminal Justice Act 1988, it was the Conservatives who made offences like common assault and criminal damage summary only, not jury trials. And we are rightly proud of our legal traditions, but it is untrue to suggest that the lack of jury trials is somehow unique to despotic regimes. Sweden, number 1 in the World Justice Project global rankings, is a country that doesn't use jury trials at all. Norway, ranked number 3, also doesn't, nor does Germany or the Netherlands. And in France and Denmark and Canada, only the most serious cases are heard by juries. Now, I believe that jury trials are a fundamental part of our justice system, and it is right that they remain so. But something has to change. And without really bold action, the backlog will continue to grow. We need to ensure that justice for victims across the country... I will give way.
For giving way. I just wondered why she wouldn't look to implement the recommendations from the Shadow Secretary of State before seeking to restrict jury trials.
Exactly. I think that there are a huge number of additional measures which will be rolled out, and I look forward to continuing to engage with Justice Ministers about other measures which I believe will help, and we have more coming after the next stage of the Leveson review. But we do need to see really bold action to ensure that justice for victims across the country is happening and not years into the future. They need a criminal justice system that works, and we all, the British people, need to have faith in our criminal justice system again.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to follow the honourable member, but I would just say I was listening to a speech very closely. It was largely invalidated, though, by the admission by the Minister when she said that she would have done this anyway, irrespective of any backlogs. There is no guarantee, and she can't assure the House, neither can the Minister, because there's no impact assessment, there's no modelling that has been shown to the members in this House. They cannot guarantee that this backlog would come down because of the abolition of trial by jury or partial abolition, which I'm sure she will concede is the case. The Minister puts it under the guise of modernisation, but we have to be very, very clear about what is at stake. This is 800 years of legal precedent set out in the Magna Carta, and how clever they were in 1215 when they came up with this legal mechanism, which makes sure that we, as the individual citizen, have the right to pass judgment on our peers. A mechanism which goes to the right, I will in due course, the mechanism which goes right to the heart of our society, which shapes the power of the relationship between the individual or group of individuals with the state. So the state cannot abuse its power. It cannot go beyond the fact of when it has to make a decision about taking away someone's liberty or livelihood or their reputation. It is a panel of peers who will make that judgment. That is what is at stake.
My honourable friend consider that when the Conservative governments have reduced the number of types of offences that are heard by juries, that they were wrong to do so? And would he agree that it is absolutely necessary to see some modernisation, acknowledging that criminal trials have changed and the evidence presented in those trials have changed over years?
I'm delighted the member called me our honourable friend. I accept such an accolade. Look, the point of this motion today is that I agree with the trial by jury. I think it has validity in where it is placed, and by reducing it, as the government is proposing, without any assessment, without any guarantee of numbers, we on this side of the House think it's wrong. Now, the member opposite and many of the members set out a number of ways, albeit in the party political guise, they set out a number of ways where we could reduce the backlogs. But the reality is the government isn't even talking about those in a serious way. It is talking about reducing jury trials. I was here when the Justice Secretary stood at the dispatch box and said reducing jury trials to reduce the backlog. That is, those two things do not go hand in hand, and that is why there is cross-party opposition. There is opposition from professional organisations, from the Criminal Bar Association, from all sorts of organisations, judges, saying that this will not achieve what they want to do. I was approached by a constituent of mine who wrote to me today, actually, who talked about the improvement of sitting days, a local barrister who sees this day in, day out. He wants an investment in sitting days. We call for that. We've called for prisoner transport services to be on time. I think the Minister referred to some of these, targeted removal of cases that can no longer be prosecuted, and of course the investment of basic infrastructure in court. If all of those had been assessed and looked at and invested in, that may have even had cross-party support, as the Shadow Justice Secretary offered. But in fact, I was surprised by the tone of the Minister, who then had this glaring admission that this would have happened anyway. This is about a big statist ideology undermining trial by jury and expanding it. And fundamental to it, in my view, is an arrogance. It's an arrogance, as we've continued to hear. We've just heard from my honourable friend to my left here about how it will undermine fairness in the system, because there's an arrogance to say actually lawyers will know better than juries. We don't always expect, the whole nature of this trial by jury is not to expect the individual juror to have an expertise in everything. It is the collective decision making which takes away bias, which takes away discrimination, which none of the members opposite can guarantee a judge which is as neutral as they must be and as professional as they are. They cannot guarantee that the individual judge won't demonstrate those biases, and that is the point that we are making, that this fundamentally undermines the individual liberties that we rely on in this society, one of the most fundamental individual liberties. Yeah.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Does he share my concern that if the argument runs that, well, it's because it's the expert lawyers arguing their case to an expert judge, the next way of trying to speed up the jury process or modernise our legal process, is to reduce the rights of appeal, because it will have been expert judges alone without the benefit of a lay jury, and that will be a further erosion of our rights.
And I thank the honourable member. I suspect I'm running out of time. 1 minute. Well, in that case, I say to you, I agree with my honourable friend in that case. Of course, the fundamental point here is that this is a slippery slope. It opens the door to further erosion of individual rights, and we may all here think that this is a good idea because, or the government members may think that it's a good idea because it cuts time. But there may well be a moment. There may well be a moment where an individual has to rely on a trial by jury, and that is their right, by the way. They can request those because it gives fairness, and it is that fundamental right of being judged by our peers that we rely on. And I implore members opposite to follow the example of the member for Kingston upon Hull East, who is taking a very brave stance.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Who'd have thought a government led by a human rights lawyer would be leading the charge to remove one of our most basic human rights, trial by jury. This government is removing the right to a jury trial for any offences that carries a likely sentence of less than 3 years, supposedly to reduce the backlog of waiting cases to go to trial. But let's look at the evidence. There is a backlog of 78,000 cases. There are around 1.3 million prosecutions in England and Wales every year, and 10% of those cases go before a Crown Court. Of those, 3 out of 10 go to trial. These reforms mean that there will now be more than 2 out of 10 still going before a jury. So from those figures, there is no realistic impact change to those waiting lists from what they are doing, removing a fundamental right. I mean, who was doing the maths from this? The Lord Chancellor, mastermind Lord Chancellor. No wonder the Prime Minister appointed him. But look, my constituents of Tatton, from school pupils to the leader of the Northern Circuit and barristers from the Middle Temple, urged me to speak today to say that this was an absolute disgrace and to put forward some of their suggestions. So from the barrister at St. John's Buildings, who said, actually, I don't believe at all that cutting of a trial by jury will get down these lists, will sort out the problem. In fact, I'm deeply concerned that such proposals will further erode the trust of the public in our justice system. It will remove their participation in criminal justice, and there is no evidence it will make any impact on the delays. A better way, solutions which would stop and stop this backlog, would be to stop the cap on the number of days that can be set. Let courts sit around the clock, and also sort out the failure of the prisoner transport system that doesn't get defendants to court, or they get them there late and wastes time. Now, further, another barrister, a criminal barrister from King's Counsel at Lincoln House Chambers in Manchester, said, I'm very concerned that curtailing jury trials is based on no credible evidence at all. In particular, there has been no pilot scheme. It appears that the suggested savings of 20% has been pulled out of thin air. And very importantly, it will erode a deeply entrenched constitutional principle that a jury may acquit as a matter of conscience in these cases. It will remove a bulwark against misuse of the criminal court by the government and those in authority, and the ability of a jury to take a view favourable to a defendant for reasons other than the evidence of guilt. And what about the Lord Chancellor? Until a few weeks ago, he believed in juries too, jury by trial. And one thing that backbenchers on the opposite of the opposition should really take into concern is, constituents have said to me that for such an important change to our unwritten constitution, there should have been mention of this in the Labour Party manifesto. because that would have factored into my, and this is his, voting decision, and it could well have been, if not it would have been, a very different decision. So the debate today has been very revealing. No data, no impact assessments, no pilots, and the Minister herself, who even suggested
Order. Speaking limit is now 3 minutes. Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Plans to restrict access to jury trial takes a sledgehammer to one of the most important protections for the people of this country. I would expect that any government suggesting a change of this magnitude would have a strong rationale for doing so. Instead, we hear the nonsensical argument that curtailing jury trials will address the court's backlog. Yet the Minister of State for Courts herself told the House that only 3% of court cases are jury cases. So before we even get into this debate, we need clarity on what this change means for the backlog. That means modelling and timescales, not justifications based on religious belief. I would suggest the government is getting desperate when that is the best it can offer. Maybe next we'll hear that the Tooth Fairy backs digital ID, or Father Christmas supports giving away the Chagos Islands. Back in the real world, in 2024, the Lady Chief Justice gave evidence to the Justice Select Committee that our courts face around 100 unplanned closures every week, with 200 near closures per month. This is in line with credible data suggesting that just yesterday, 15% of our Crown Court rooms sat empty, and it's the same today. If the Minister wants to tackle the backlog, might this be the best place to start? But coming now on to the key benefit of jury trials themselves, which is the involvement of our peers in delivering justice. These are people in our own communities with no obvious axe to grind or political motivations. Any justice system that concentrates powers in the hands of a small number of repeat decision-makers inevitably risks groupthink and unconscious or even conscious bias. A jury is a built-in safeguard. 12 ordinary people drawn at random, bringing different instincts and experiences, and forced to test the prosecution's case in a way a single decision-maker cannot. Simply put, it's safer to spread human fallibility across 12 people than to concentrate it in one. A system in which liberty hinges solely on inputs from various arms of the state, the police, the CPS, and then a judge, cannot be as inherently fair as one in which justice is done with the people's direct involvement. But the curtailing of jury trials is not the only concern here. Ministers want to expand sentencing powers in the magistrates' courts by allowing them to hand down sentences of up to 2 years, while at the same time restricting the ability to appeal decisions taken in those courts. It is extraordinary that someone can sit as a magistrate from the age of 18 with no legal qualifications or experience, and this government thinks they should be able to decide whether someone loses their liberty. If you were in the dock, would you be happy with that? Juries may not be perfect, but I know what I would prefer. If the government is determined to push ahead with this, then it is knowingly increasing the risk of wrongful convictions and excessive sentences. We know more than 40% of appeals against decisions taken by magistrate courts are upheld. How many miscarriages of justice is this government willing to accept? Ministers would be foolish to trade away a centuries-old safeguard for a headline about swift justice, only to discover afterwards that our courts are no speedier, just less just. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that the British people must remain participants in their system of justice rather than mere observers. I urge ministers to think again. Do not curtail jury trials. Do not concentrate yet more power in fewer hands. Fix the courts. Protect our legal heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The right to a trial by jury is a right that has stood at the very centre of our criminal justice system for centuries. It is a crucial check on the power of the state as it undertakes one of the most solemn duties, to try a citizen and to determine guilt or innocence. This principle is, in the words of the Lord Chancellor himself, a fundamental part of our democracy. But instead of taking practical and obvious measures, such as fully utilising courtrooms that currently sit empty to address the serious backlog in the criminal justice system, the government has instead opted for the destructive option that in reality is unlikely to adequately address the pressure on the system at all. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's approach rests on the flawed assumption that only certain cases are serious enough to merit trial by jury.
But who, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to decide what counts as serious? Horrific crimes such as murder and rape are rightly treated with the utmost gravity. But offences deemed lesser can still ruin lives. A theft accusation can end a career. An assault can leave lasting physical and psychological harm. A reputation can be destroyed beyond repair. Our justice system is not merely about classification, but about justice itself. It works by consent, and it is the stronger for it. Trial by jury embodies that public consent, and without it, we risk victims' trust in its fairness and defendants' confidence that they will be judged fairly by their peers. Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate is also about judicial decision-making. The reality is that not all judges are created equal. No one is infallible. Judges can get things wrong, and they do so, and can do so on more than one occasion. The strength of the jury system lies in renewal. Each case is considered by a fresh group of citizens. If a judge becomes the sole arbiter of guilt, there is a risk that errors, conscious or unconscious, can be repeated. The jury system makes our criminal justice system more robust, more resilient, and ultimately more trustworthy. Madam Deputy Speaker, jury trials also play a vital role in ensuring justice is done because they are drawn from the communities they serve. That's a point that was made to me by Daniel and Grace Robinson, who are constituents of mine and who are experts in addressing modern slavery and criminal exploitation. From the hundreds of cases they have seen that juries often recognise indicators of modern slavery much more than would have been done without them. And that's because they bring a broad range of experience. The government seeks to justify these changes on the basis of the backlog reduction and also on cost, but we must not weaken a system that is respected across the world.
Order. Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we have heard, trial by jury is one of this country's most fundamental rights. Only months ago, this government was elected and ministers were saying that jury service is an essential part of criminal justice, that it underpins impartiality and fairness that runs through our legal system. I would have thought that every member from right across the House would agree with that statement. Not a single one of us stood on a manifesto at the last general election to abolish jury trials in this country. So why would ministers be so keen to abandon this important tradition of our great country? Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact we are asking that question will come as no surprise to our constituents. From abolishing local councils, cancelling elections, to an imposing an authoritarian digital ID scheme, it's all part of the same pattern. Again and again, this Labour government shows they are more than happy to curtail the voice and freedom of the British people. If the Ministry of Justice had exhausted every possible route to get that backlog down, their proposals on jury trials might have a bit more credibility. This government could remove the cap on sitting days, ensuring courts can work at full capacity and ensure they work day and night to eliminate inefficiencies in the system which waste hours of court time. But they have not, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having seen the justice system up close through my work with Hertfordshire's Police and Crime Commissioner, I know huge amounts of time is lost before a case even reaches court. A recent study from the University of Leicester found that on average it takes 113 days to charge a suspect after a crime has been recorded. Issues between police forces and the CPS when cases are submitted can add at least 72 days to a case's length. Communication between police forces and prosecutors could be vastly improved. Digital evidence, such as body-worn cameras, CCTV, is widely present today. And the study notes that cases with digital evidence were submitted more quickly to the CPS than those without. But investigators do also warn about how time-consuming handling that sort of evidence can be. The government should therefore be focusing on ensuring police forces, prosecutors, the courts, and of course victims take full advantage of video evidence so that it accelerates justice rather than slows it down. This is just one example of the actions that ministers could be taking instead of embarking on this policy that abandons such an essential component of justice in the United Kingdom. I urge this government to start listening, use all the tools available to them and drop this disastrous policy.
Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by saying how extraordinary it was to hear the Minister earlier say that she'd be pursuing this even though there wasn't even if there wasn't a backlog to deal with. It suggests that this was planned all along, but it's absolutely nowhere in the Labour Party manifesto. I'd like the Minister, in summing up, to explain why that's the case. There is absolutely no mandate to reduce trial by jury. It is a profound constitutional shift, one that strikes at the heart of the relationship between citizen and state. Trial by jury is a centuries-old safeguard designed to ensure that an individual can be judged guilty only by their peers and not by the machinery of the state. It is the ordinary person's shield against arbitrary power, and yet, astonishingly, the government now asks us to believe that this ancient protection must be curtailed just because ministers don't want to do the hard work to reduce the backlog. The Bar Council, representing the very professionals who keep our justice system functioning, are correct to raise alarm bells. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that restricting jury trials will reduce the backlog. None whatsoever. The government has produced no modelling, no data, no analysis to justify this constitutional gamble. This work should have been done before the announcement was made, especially for something of this magnitude. Around 3% of criminal cases currently reach a jury. To claim that reducing jury trials further will magically clear the backlog of tens of thousands of cases is just implausible. It defies logic. It makes no sense whatsoever. This is a complete distraction. No honourable members supporting the government position have been able to explain how this will actually shift the dial on reducing the backlog. But the concern is deeper, and that's been explained by honourable friends on this side. Every time this government faces a crisis, its instinct is not to work out how sensibly to fix the system, but to take things away from British citizens. Examples have been given by honourable friends. Digital ID, Chagos, for example, and now taking away the right to be judged by their peers because they can't get a grip of the criminal justice system. Judge-only trials may be quicker, but they're not fairer. They concentrate power in a single hand of a single state official. Did it cross anyone's mind to pilot juryless trials in Crown Courts? And if not, why not? They removed the diversity of experience, the collective wisdom, and the democratic legitimacy that juries bring. How many judges are under 40? How many are non-white? How many were educated in state schools? How many have personal experience of the issues? Now ask the same question of juries.
Alistair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For me, the key question in this is what would be the impact on public confidence in our legal system? And I'm going to answer that question from my professional life, which was spent as a criminal barrister practicing in our criminal courts. And I also answer it from the perspective of someone who practiced in Northern Ireland, where we had both jury trials and judge-alone trials, called diplomat courts. So I've seen them both. I've operated them both. I know what the resulting public confidence level is from those respective types of trials. And I have absolutely no doubt that the public have far more confidence in 12 peers making a decision than in a single judge making a decision. It's not that our judges aren't intellectually adequate. It's not that they don't have massive legal experience. It's the fact that they do not have the lived experience of 12 individuals who are deciding the facts of an equal person in respect of what is charged against them. And that is the genius of the jury system. The 12 individuals who come to it without preconceptions, who come to it without the baggage of anything else, can, when they hear the evidence and the evidence only, make the decision. Yes, I will.
The learned member is making a very good point, and I too am a recovering lawyer myself, but will he agree on the impact of these proposals? That because of the lack of confidence, what we're likely to see is not a cut in the backlog, but an increase
in applications to the appeal court to overturn unsafe convictions. Hardly a way to fix the justice system.
Indeed, and indeed, I would remind the House that because of concerns about the diplomat courts, there was in Northern Ireland an automatic right of appeal, so as to try and build some confidence. But that automatic right of appeal would not exist in the main in these proposals. But we're told this will save time. This will not save time. What time are you saving? An hour to swear in a jury? A day, maybe, that a jury deliberates on? But as the Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull East pointed out, a judge who has to make a decision might give an extra a decision there and then, but he has to go away and write it up. He'll spend a lot longer writing it up, knowing it has to go through the fine-tooth comb of a court of appeal, perhaps, than a jury will spend in reaching a decision. So there will be no time saving. The loss of time, the delays in our courts, come primarily, in my experience, from delays in providing disclosure, from delays in witnesses not being available. None of that will change under this system. But what will change under this system is a body blow to confidence in the judicial system and the legal process. And for me, the government lost this debate today when the bottom fell out of their case, when the Justice Minister when the Minister had to say, effectively, this is not about delays. This is about an ideology. It's an ideology which ill fits this House, and an ideology that this House most convincingly should reject.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since the 1220 trial by 12 good men, trials by jury have been taking place. Juries are a key way that citizens consent to and participate in one of the most significant powers the state holds, to convict and imprison subjects. According to the Secretary of State's figures stated in this House on the 15th of December last year, only 3% of all criminal cases are heard by a judge and jury under the current regime. He also claimed that jury trials will remain a cornerstone of the British justice system. Delayed justice is justice denied. And yet now he is choosing to bring to an end almost 1,000-year system in the name of efficiency. This is a complete red herring. There are remedies already available that would help solve that backlog. In November, the Institute for Government stated that the major drivers of poor productivity are not having enough criminal lawyers, badly maintained court buildings, shortages of court staff and poor technology. Whilst none of these are quick or easy to overcome, maximising productivity is a far more practical and measured step than the controversial and nuclear option of introducing judge-only trials via the introduction of a new intermediate court, the Crown Court Bench Division, that has neither been piloted nor thoroughly modelled. And I heard the Minister there chuntering from a sedentary position about who started that. Well, the government's doing nothing to address it. They could do as we do on these benches and suggest that by starting providing adequate sitting days, Lady Chief Justice Karl has already said that currently there are 2,000 days going unused. Rather than abolish a significant part of our system, I would advise the government help sort the backlog by allocating these. The IFG identified that scrapping jury trials will save between 7 to 8% of the time currently spent on Crown Court jury cases. Abolishing a practice which such a small percentage of cases use shows this government is more focused on the same tinkering at the edges that the Justice Secretary has stated we cannot afford to do, as opposed to using pragmatic, clear solutions that could help fix the issues. It also represents yet another in a long range of examples of Labour wanting to take power from citizens and further engorge the state. The Justice Secretary need not only listen to me. The Bar Council's leadership issued a statement that made clear their position that they are against the curtailment of jury trials, stating, "There is no evidence we have seen that it will significantly reduce the Crown Court backlog. However, there is evidence that diminishing the constitutional principle of trial by jury will erode trust in our criminal justice system." I will give mine.
When the Justice Secretary gave evidence to the Justice Committee in December, he said that the evidence underpinning that 20% time saving that comes from Sir Byron's report will be released. But if it does make that proposition good, and I understand he disputes that, but if it does, would he and his party still oppose even the principle of structural reform, even if it's necessary to cut the backlog and keep it down?
Sorry, I've just been informed that the Honourable Member only walked into the chamber about 5 minutes ago.
Order. The member's been here for a while. He wasn't allowed to participate in a speech because he wasn't here at the beginning, but he has been here for a while. Ben Obsidiecti.
I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I will make progress. No one who voted for Labour voted for this seismic change.
Well, my repent good way.
It is rushed knee-jerk and smacks of a Justice Secretary who's still smarting from his demotion from one of the great offices of state, is now overcompensating by attempting to make his mark. I urge the government to reconsider, and I urge those on the government benches who plan to rebel today to do so, clear on the conscience that they are simply cutting out the middleman, because the government will inevitably end up where those rebels already are.
Monica Harding. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trial by jury is not a luxury. It is one of the oldest and most fundamental protections in this country, and it is a key safeguard of liberty. Yet under this government, it is being treated not as a principle to be defended, but as a system to be rationed. We all agree that there is a crisis in the criminal justice system and that we need to bring the backlog down. Cases are drifting for years before reaching court, draining justice of its force and credibility. To the frustration of my constituents in East Walton, the consequences fall heavily on victims and witnesses, prolonged delays, weakened evidence, memories fade, statements are withdrawn and prosecutions collapse, and confidence in law and order, and therefore democracy, falters. As my local borough commander told me this week, this undermines policing. The government have rightly prioritised community policing, and my own force in East Walton have increased the solving rate of burglaries by 84%. So wouldn't it be great if we all slept safely in our beds? No, because residents were shocked to learn that 2 individuals arrested for burglary charged in December will not appear in court until September 2027. Similar problems arise in youth justice, where sentences is repeatedly deferred, leaving young offenders without timely consequences, and that most important lesson, if you are young, that if you commit a crime, you will be punished. It erodes public confidence. But why not use the most immediate lever, lift the cap on court sitting days? Late last year, I visited Kingston Crown Court. The regional backlog has grown by 25%, yet courtrooms sit unused. Staff described to me the frustration of having judges, clerks, ushers, spaces, and cases ready to proceed only to be blocked by centrally imposed limits on sitting days. Government imposed caps. It's nonsensical. It makes no sense to pay for court buildings, judges and staff, and then prevent them from operating fully. That is a false economy which shifts the cost onto victims, communities and public trust. The government have only marginally increased Crown Court sitting days, barely touching the scale of the backlog and falling far short of what is needed. And this goes back to the priorities of the Treasury. Surely they must prioritise law and order first. Instead, the government has decided to treat jury trials as a nuisance. They seem too costly and inconvenient. They have been squeezed not because they have failed, but because cutting them is easier than rebuilding the system around them. This is a political choice, and it seems like an ideological choice from the conversation earlier, not an inevitability. The Liberal Democrats have set out a serious alternative to lift the cap, invest in court buildings, lift the cap of sitting days, use courtrooms effectively, fix broken contracts that cancel hearings, including the failure of prisoners' transport to bring defendants to court on trial, and invest in rehabilitation to reduce offending. This is not what my constituents in East Walton want.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do not agree that the government should curtail our rights to trial by jury. Trial by jury is an ancient right in England and is the very essence of our criminal justice system. Combined with the government proposals for digital ID, it reveals a very authoritarian attitude. It marks a significant shift in the balance of power between the citizen and the state, and I shall vote against it. There is a crisis within the criminal justice system, and specifically with the Crown Court backlog. But that backlog was not caused by trial by jury and will not be cured by its removal. Why does the Lord Chancellor believe that abolishing the right to jury trials for those likely to receive a sentence of 3 years or less is the right thing to do to bring down the backlog? If it is based, as he says, on evidence, then will he publish that as soon as possible? In the last 2 years, government figures show that the Ministry of Justice, which includes the court service, lost the highest number of days per member of staff in sickness and absence in the whole of Whitehall. An average of 10.7 days sickness, more than 2 working weeks for every member of staff. That is more than 30% higher than the civil service average and over twice the UK average if you include the private sector. Were the Lord Chancellor to focus his efforts on improving the efficiency of his own department, he might start to see the system as a whole improve. With approximately, happy to give way.
But I think it's important to, because I've just been to visit Bournemouth Crown Court and Magistrate Court, and they actually talked about that question of sickness. They talked about the fact that their staff have been carrying the load for so many members of a team that weren't in place because they'd seen austerity. There's so many staff in the Crown Court system who may be going on to sickness leave because they are burned out. They're burned out from years of cuts. Would he not recognise that actually what we need to have is an investment in our Crown Court system in order that they can get back on their feet and that criminal justice can also get back on its feet?
In my experience, Madam Deputy Speaker, staff absence is normally caused and the result of poor management. And I suspect the Ministry of Justice is managing its staff significantly worse than the rest of the civil service if staff sickness is 30% above the public sector, which wasn't great to begin with. With approximately 16,400 staff in the court service, simply reducing the rate of absences to the civil service average would free up nearly 50,000 working days. That would help cut the backlog without undermining the principle of a fair trial. We know this government has a habit of making bad decisions, getting ambitious backbenchers to defend them for a few months, sending a hapless junior minister out to face the media while the Secretary of State hides in his office, only at the last minute to realise what a disaster these plans are, before executing a U-turn that comes far too late to gain any credit. We've seen this on winter fuel, on welfare reforms, on the grooming gangs inquiry, on the 2-child benefit cap, and most recently the family farm and family business tax. So I would urge Labour backbenchers to be very cautious about supporting the government this evening. They risk voting for something their constituents don't want, that in their hearts they know is wrong. And ultimately they know that late in the day the government will back down, leaving their credibility in shreds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I wouldn't say this of most of the debates that I attend in the House, but I think this one has been genuinely very revealing. And revealing primarily for what the Minister said both at the end of her remarks and what she said in her opening. And as the member for North Antrim quite powerfully brought out, and he speaks with great professional experience on this issue, these are proposals that will not work. It is exactly what she's been told by her own colleagues. The member for Kingston upon Hull East described them as ludicrous proposals that won't work. It's what she's been told by her own profession, her own colleagues in the legal profession, who point to the fact that these proposals won't work. And indeed that also speaks to a conundrum of past debates we've had on this as to why there is such a reluctance on the part of the government to bring forward the impact assessment. If they've already made this decision, if they've already taken the view that these changes will work, then surely they'd want to present the evidence to prove that. And indeed, as was pointed out earlier in the debate, if they won't publish the full impact assessment, surely they'd publish the threshold, the minimum tipping point on which this policy would be determined worthwhile, not least given how fundamental a change that is being proposed. But indeed, as the Minister set out at the end of her remarks, irrespective of whether there was a crisis in the courts, this is a change she will be making nonetheless. And there we have it, there we have the crux, the nail on the head that the member for North Antrim hit, which is this is an ideological change. Now that in turn opens up a second paradox, which is if it's ideological, why wasn't it in a manifesto? Indeed, if it's ideological, why was it contrary to what the Justice Secretary said so many times in opposition? When did he have this change of belief to this new ideological position? And that in turn speaks, and given the time limit, it turns also to a further contradiction, because the Prime Minister so often has spoken about the need for more trust in politics. And yet we have a policy here with no transparency, no evidence it will work, a fundamental change after 800 years of legal precedents that wasn't in the manifesto, that's contrary to the remarks that they made. And I close, as the member for Bridgewater pointed out, and he gave a list, as the member for New Forest West quite rightly identified, because at the start of her remarks, the Minister also spoke about choices. This will be a choice for Labour backbenchers, and it's a choice they're at risk of making only for then the Prime Minister to belatedly change his mind.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to be able to wind up this Opposition Day debate on the Prime Minister and Justice Secretary's ill-considered, poorly evidenced and rash plan to curtail one of our cornerstone rights, the right to a trial by jury. A debate in which the member for North Antrim colourfully described as one in which the bottom fell out of the government's argument. Mr Speaker, I disagree with the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary on Madam Deputy Speaker, on very many issues. But today, for once, I find myself in fulsome, wholehearted agreement with not just the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary and the Justice Minister. I agree with all three of them that jury trials are a crucial, vital part of our justice system that should be protected wherever possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, even with this Prime Minister, who has an unrivalled reputation for having opinions that last as long as they remain popular with whoever's vote he's seeking at a particular point in time, even with this Prime Minister, we're in the extraordinary position where his government is now putting forward a proposal that the Justice Secretary and the Justice Minister and the Prime Minister himself all previously argued vigorously against. In fact, I'm going to indulge in a degree of parliamentary plagiarism. I'm going to let them do the hard work of writing at least some of my speech for today. First, I'll hand over to the Justice Minister. He previously said on this issue of limiting jury trials that, I quote, "Instead of weakening a key constitutional right, the government should do the hard work. We all have the right to be judged by our peers, and when the prospect of imprisonment from society is before us, to take that right away would be a wholly draconian act." Next, I'll ask the Justice Secretary to take over. Madam Deputy Speaker, he said, and I quote, "Jury trials are fundamental to our democracy. We must protect them. And that jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea." I quite literally could not have said it better myself. And finally, whilst I appreciate he is a busy man, I will lean on the Prime Minister's carefully considered words. He said, "The general and overriding presumption should be jury trial with very, very limited exceptions, and that the right to trial by jury is an important factor in the delicate balance between the power of the state and the freedom of the individual. The further it is restricted, the greater the imbalance." And that question of balance is, of course, at the heart of the matter today. In the Minister's opening remarks and in other remarks made by backbenchers, thin on the ground as they have been, it has rightly been pointed out that we do, of course, have criminal trials without juries. That's a fact. But that alone is no argument for these measures. If that is the argument, then you could simply do away with jury trials entirely without anyone being concerned. It is and has always been a balance, but as the Justice Minister, Justice Secretary and Prime Minister, or at least at some point historically, clearly understood, altering that balance should only ever be considered when there really is no other option. To give a comparison of seriousness, during the pandemic itself, in the heart of a crisis widely accepted to be the biggest challenge to face our nation since World War II, jury trials continued. In fact, it was in World War II that we last saw anything like the proposals as radical as the ones we're considering today, and actually they were not in fact even close to it in terms of the proposed curtailment we have before us. During that time, we reduced the number of jurors from 12 to 7 in most cases. So at a time when our nation was under attack, when every element of life was turned over to the war effort, we modified but fundamentally retained the right of jury trials. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to say that the meeting of minds between myself and the triumvirate making this decision is only the beginning. There are 37 Labour MPs for whom I find myself in common cause today. It's fair to say, to name just a few, that the Mother of the House, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, the members for Leeds East, the member for Walthamstow, Liverpool Riverside, Salford, are very, very far distances from me on the political spectrum. But along with other colleagues, they are very clear that these proposals are wrong, and I wholeheartedly agree with them. And when there are 37 names and a signed public letter, any decent whip will tell you there are at least the same number lurking in the background, not willing to go public, but rushing to answer that whip's phone call at the weekend to say they're not happy with these proposals. And what do those 37 say? They say that these proposals are madness and will cause more problems than they solve, and that the public will not stand for this erosion of a fundamental right, particularly given there are numerous other things the government can do to more effectively reduce the backlog. And that final point takes us right back to this issue of balance. The government has quite simply failed to articulate why this measure, these proposals, are the only way forward. The government might have received a more sympathetic reception had they truly exhausted all other options, if they'd stretched every sinew since their election to tackle this issue. Because as our motion acknowledges, the courts are under unprecedented pressure. No one disputes that. Delays are too long, victims are waiting too long for justice, and defendants are left in limbo. Prior to the pandemic, the Crown Court backlogs were lower than the backlogs we inherited from the previous Labour government, and I don't remember Labour MPs being concerned about that at this time, but COVID hit and placed unprecedented strain on the criminal justice system, leaving a long and difficult legacy. The result of that was an enormous reduction in court capacity that led to backlogs shooting up in a way it never had before. I should remind the House again that even during that challenging time, there was cross-party support of the guiding principle that juries' trials should continue. After the pandemic, England and Wales resumed jury trials faster than many comparable countries, one of the shortest suspensions anywhere because they were treated as a priority. The previous government opened and extended the use of 20 Nightingale courtrooms, increased the number of judges, raised the judicial retirement age, and increased in a short number of years the number of sitting days by more than 20,000, an historic, unprecedented level. But despite this loss, the loss of capacity could not be simply undone. I will give way.
Comments around sitting days, would he then condemn the Conservative cut of nearly 15% of sitting days in 2019, and would he congratulate this Labour government in increasing the number of sitting days?
As the Shadow Justice Secretary outlined, I think over a number of years, over many decades, there hasn't been the investment in the justice system. I would also make quite clear this claim to having record levels of sitting days is actually a bit of a statistical anomaly, because the government will know there was an absolute change in the measure of sitting days, and actually when you use the historical measure and compare it, we did actually match that number of sitting days, or perhaps even higher historically. And of course we uncapped sitting days a number of years during the pandemic, something that this government failed to do, alongside failing to increase the number of sitting days in a rapid way, something that the Institute for Government said it made it more difficult for the government to make use of. But as I said, there is no dispute that there is issues, and that members across the House have recognised their long-standing. The question is, what do we do about them? But let's be clear about how much of the unacceptably long waits are actually a result of a wait for a jury trial. The Justice Secretary is quite rightly being criticised for quoting statistics about victim dropout rates in a deeply misleading way. We don't want to see any victims drop out for any reason, and we don't want to see any long waits, but less than 10% of dropouts occur post-charge, and that figure is actually coming down. It's not helpful to the understanding of this issue for members to quote waits of 6 or 7 years, which in fact relate to the delay from alleged offence to sentencing. Yes, waits for trial from point of charge are too long, but that's just part of the picture. Jury trials are not a quirk, a happenstance for how we deliver criminal justice in this country. They're a foundational principle of our justice system, reaching back to Magna Carta. For more than 800 years, ordinary men and women have been trusted to sit in judgment, to weigh evidence and to decide guilt or evidence. Or innocence. That public participation is not a flaw in the system, it's one of its greatest sources of legitimacy. Removing juries, even for a narrow category of cases, let alone the radical changes before us today, alters the relationship between the citizen and the state. It replaces collective judgment with individual, arbitrary authority. I will.
In light of the Shadow Minister's comments, does he think it was wrong through the 1988 Criminal Justice Act for the Conservative government at that time to make offences like criminal damage and common assault to be summary only, removing juries in those offences?
I wonder if the member was actually listening to my speech. I've said throughout these issues are one of balance, and as the Prime Minister has said, and as the Justice Secretary has said, and as the Justice Minister has said, you have to tread very, very carefully on these issues. And for the member to draw comparisons between minor changes to whole-scale, huge reductions in the use of jury trials shows she fails to understand that these issues are one of balance. And of course, the obvious flaw in the arguments being made by the government in support of doing this, that this is a measure to tackle what we should all consider to be a temporary problem, is that these measures are permanent, without any plan to reverse them when the backlog is down, similar to the temporary measures in World War II that I mentioned. What is missing? I will.
Agree with me that curtailing jury trials won't solve the delays. It will simply push that backlog back into the appeal courts. And worse still, does he agree that it risks creating a two-tier justice system where those who can afford to appeal will appeal and those who cannot will be left behind?
The member is pointing out one of very many flaws in the arguments that the government has put forward for justifying its case, and they simply have not made it. Because court sitting days are still being wasted. Yesterday alone, more than 50 Crown courtrooms sat empty. And let's be clear, while this government leans heavily on at least some of what has been proposed coming from Sir Brian Levison's review, they need only have looked into the bowels of the MOJ to unearth these exact ideas. That is because it will come as little surprise to members on these benches we have been here before with the Labour governments. As Justice Secretary, Jack Straw also proposed removing the right to a jury trial in either way offences when Labour were last in office. As is the case today, rightly, members of both houses and people from across the political spectrum united to stop those proposals, so we can do away with the pretence that this is purely the workings of an independent figure. I'm afraid Sir Brian has become a shield for defending these ideas, a shield they lacked last time around, which they obviously hope is going to make the difference this time. And we should be right to fear that this is the thin end of the wedge. Thanks to the plans being leaked, we know what the Justice Secretary actually wanted to do. He wanted to go much further than even these proposals by removing jury trials for sentences of up to 5 years. Where will they go next if they succeed in these proposals? It's also impossible to ignore the wider context. A number of my constituents have raised with me, and I know a number of other members in this House, that at the same time this government argues the fundamental legal safeguards must be set aside, it's spending £1.8 billion on a nationwide mandatory digital ID system. The Criminal Bar Association, the Bar Council and the Law Society have all warned against these proposals. They've been clear that restricting jury trials will not solve the backlog. It risks distracting from the real work that needs to be done, fixing the basics, investing in infrastructure and people and making them function efficiently. Madam Speaker, I'll close by going a little bit closer to home. Kipling, in his 1911 poem, Kipling, who lived in my constituency in Bexhill and Battle, you can actually find a statue of Rudyard Kipling in the village of Burwas in my constituency. He said in his 1911 poem, the reeds of Runnymede, the centrality to British freedom of trial by jury. He said, and I quote, she said, and I quote, I'll finish on this, Madam Deputy Speaker, if they can stop their chuntering, they can get on with their... He said, at Runnymede, your rights were won at Runnymede. No freeman shall be fined or bound or dispossessed of freehold ground except by lawful judgment found and passed upon him by peers. Forget not, after all these years, the charter signed at Runnymede. Mr. Speaker, those of us on these benches have not forgotten. Let's hope enough members opposite haven't forgotten either.
Minister. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's quite tough to follow on from that, actually, but here we go. This has been a very useful debate, and every single contribution, including those from Conservative colleagues, has commented on the crisis in our courts that we inherited from the Conservatives after 14 years. And we have heard some suggestions, and the gist of the suggestions from the Conservative opposition and the Liberal Democrat opposition is, let's get more court sitting days. Well, wouldn't it have helped, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Conservatives hadn't closed half of the magistrates' courts in England and Wales? Across the entire estate, Madam Deputy Speaker, they sold off more than 40% of all court buildings for far less than they were worth to the communities they served. As a result of their vandalism to our court system, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are now nearly 80,000 cases waiting to be heard, and it will continue to rise beyond 100,000 without investment, efficiency savings, but also structural modernisation. And let us be clear, this government will bring forward a modernisation package that will drag the criminal justice system into the 21st century, ensuring justice is done fairly and swiftly, ensuring our system meets the challenges modern criminal cases bring, ensuring we never again reach a point whereby the public's faith in the criminal justice system is so severely undermined. The House has heard today a clear and compelling case from my right honourable friend, the Courts Minister. She has set out bold but sensible reform we need, bringing down the backlog by the end of the Parliament, rooted in evidence, grounded in reality, and driven by a simple objective: to fix a criminal court system that is under unprecedented strain and put it on a sustainable footing for the future. I'll give way.
Actually, when she closed her statement, the principle was not about the backlog, because she said, regardless of the backlog being there, she would have gone ahead with scrapping juries in these extent. So could he clarify the government's position? Is it a principal position or dealing with the administrative burden?
We absolutely have to drag the criminal justice system into the 21st century by modernising the structures of that criminal justice system. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the context in which we operate clearly has an effect on that programme, and the fact that we have inherited an unprecedented backlog in our criminal court system affects the urgency and the radicalism of that reform. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to pay particular tribute to Sir Brian Leveson, who is no shield. His independent review has driven the reforms we are taking forward. It is rigorous, thoughtful, and absolutely clear about the scale of the challenge before us. But let us be very straight. The reforms being proposed, and that will be set out in due course before this House, are not plucked out of thin air, but the result of intensive careful work undertaken by the most senior lawyers, academics and members of the judiciary. The modernisation programme will be built on evidence. These are difficult decisions and uncomfortable, no doubt, for some within the legal profession, but absolutely vital for a properly functioning and robust system we can be proud of to take into the future. And Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just bust some of the myths that we've heard in the debate today. Some honourable and right honourable members have suggested that these changes tear up a historic right to a jury trial. Let me be abundantly clear, they do not. Article 40 of Magna Carta reminds us that we must not deny or delay a right or justice, giving us the old adage, justice delayed is justice denied. And sadly, in this country today, justice delayed has become justice denied for far too many victims. The government will not cling to mythological tradition at the expense of fairness, effectiveness and public confidence. We will rise to meet the challenge of the day rather than living in the past. And I heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, on countless occasions, the assertion that this government is scrapping jury trials. That is not true.
Not true.
Everyone has and will always have the right to a fair trial, as my honourable friend, the member for Derby North, made clear in her compelling speech. There has never been an inalienable or unqualified right to a trial by jury. And let's just set out the maths in some detail, because it is very important. Currently, 10% of all criminal cases are subject to jury trial. 7% of those plead, there is no trial, so just 3% are then subject to a jury trial. The reforms before the House today would reduce that to just 1.5%. These are modest reforms affecting a small proportion of the criminal cases in our country. And as my right honourable... I'll give way, yes.
Minister for giving way, and I have great respect for what he's saying, but I and many others on this side of the House do still have questions, so I just wondered whether he'd agree to meet those of us who think, for example, the proposals from the Criminal Bar Association deserve closer scrutiny. Would he agree to meet with us to discuss that in further detail?
I'm absolutely happy to meet with my honourable friend as ever to discuss this or many of the other issues that he raises in the House. Let's be very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a modest change to jury trials, something that has happened throughout our history, as the honourable member for Colchester has set out. And the opposition were reminded by my honourable friend, the member for Cramlington and Killingworth, that their party has made modest changes to jury trials in the past. It was Margaret Thatcher, one of the Shadow Justice Secretary's various political heroes, who reclassified crimes, including taking a motor vehicle without authority, raising the threshold for criminal damage. They became summary-only offences in 1988, so those charges were not subject to juries at all. I wonder whether the party opposite considers Mrs Thatcher to have torn up the Magna Carta or undertaken constitutional vandalism. This is rhetorical, a device that Rumpel would be proud of. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we've heard today about what more we could be doing. Well, let's just set out what we are doing. This government is investing at record levels. This year alone, we have allocated over 100,000 Crown Court sitting days, the highest number ever, and 5,000 more than the previous government. I'll remind the House again that the previous government cut Crown Court sitting days in 2019 by almost 15%. That is their record. That is their legacy. They didn't mention any of that in their speeches today. The government has committed £34 million a year for criminal legal aid advocates and £92 million a year for criminal legal aid solicitors, recognising their vital role in the justice system to fix the problem caused by their mismanagement. And we are looking at match-funded criminal barrister pupilages with a clear focus on opening up the criminal bar to more talented young people from every background. I'm happy to give way.
Minister for giving way. He tells this House that it's an insignificant number of cases that will be impacted. If that is true, then what's the point? I'm sure he's heard the adage, justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done, and that can only be done by jury trials. And
Deputy Speaker, let me explain a number of cases, but they take an inordinate amount of time. That is the whole point of what Sir Brian Leveson is setting forward. And in due course, when this legislation comes before the House, when the impact assessments are before the House, he'll be able to see that for himself. Others have argued that investment alone or ironing out inefficiencies would be enough to deal with this record or rising caseloads. We've heard about the problems with getting prisoners to court. We've heard about the buildings left with roofs that are leaking after 14 years of austerity. We are going to fix those too, but Sir Brian Leveson could not have been clearer. That will not be sufficient. Even with record investment, the Crown Court caseload is projected to exceed 116,000 by 2029. The demand is simply too great. And that is why we are driving forward a full programme of modernisation, I'll give way on that point and then I'll make progress.
I thank the Minister for giving way. He talks about record demand and the pressures on the court services. Does he recognise, and would he be able to outline what assessment has been made about the increase in pressure on the court system as a result of cracking down on the right to protest in legitimate cases?
Minister.
We treat all cases the same, and the honourable gentleman can make that speech in a debate on that subject at another time. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me end where I began. The crisis that this government inherited give rise, no doubt, to a heightened need to deliver a more modern, resilient and flexible model of criminal justice, one that protects what is fundamental, like jury trials for the most serious offences, but is bold enough to change where change is needed. So it truly serves victims, commands public confidence and is fit for the realities of the 21st century. These changes will provide a long-term, stable foundations for the criminal court system and prevent the caseload reaching these levels again. That should be our focus, not a narrow debate on the merits of tradition versus the challenges of the day, or preserving a system that so clearly no longer works for the British people. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Nick Timothy, Jerome Mayhew. Tellers for the noes, Gregor Poynton and Nezel Khalitstan. Order.
The ayes to the right, 182. The noes to the left, 290.
The ayes to the right were 182, the noes to the left were 290. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlocked. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. I declare the question as amended to be agreed to. And we now come to the second opposition day. The opposition day motion on rural communities. I'll give the House a few minutes to settle down.